Out here, where the forests swallow the highways and the night carries a weight that feels older than memory, fear doesn't come at you with claws or whispers. It comes slowly, like a shift in the air, like something watching not from the shadows, but from the soil itself. Some places are born strange, others become strange over time, and a few were never meant for people to walk on at all. My name isn't important, not compared to what happened. What matters is that I was 34 years old, a seasoned hiker, someone who grew up listening to the local stories from the old folks who lived near the forest line. Stories most people thought were just folklore, meant to keep children from wandering too deep. But the deeper you go, the more you realize those stories weren't meant for children. They were warnings for adults who thought they knew the woods better than the woods knew them. I had camped in that region before, in a stretch of forest the locals called the Hollow Lungs, a name I thought was just poetic exaggeration, some rustic attempt at describing how the morning fog pooled in the valley and drifted like breath. But the older residents, the ones whose hands shook slightly when they talked about the deep trails, said the ground wasn't right there, that it was alive in a way no forest floor should ever be. I didn't take them seriously. Back then, I relied on logic, maps, gear, training, everything except humility. And humility is the one thing the woods will teach you whether you want the lesson or not. The trip started like any other. A long drive up a dirt road with my pack in the back seat, the kind of late autumn afternoon where the sun sits low enough that everything looks like it's dipped in old gold. The air was cool, crisp. I remember feeling that small thrill that comes from stepping out of the modern world and into the raw quiet of the trees. You can hear your heartbeat in that silence. You can feel your lungs more clearly. It's peaceful, until it isn't. I carried my gear along a fading trail that locals insisted wasn't a trail at all. They said the woods reclaimed paths there faster than people could map them, that the forest shifted. Not metaphorically, moved. Breathing ground was just the most dramatic version of the story. I didn't believe it. Not yet. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing surrounded by towering, dark-barked pines that leaned slightly inward, like they were listening. The ground was soft, too soft, but I assumed it was because of the rain earlier that week. I set down my pack, stretched my back, and tried to ignore the way the moss beneath my boots felt almost cushioned. When I stepped, it didn't just compress. It subtly rose back up. Slowly. Too slowly. I crouched down, pressing my palm against the ground. It felt normal, maybe a bit springy, nothing more. Still, I chose to make camp at the edge of the clearing, closer to the dry roots of the pine cluster. I didn't like how the center of the clearing felt. Something about it made me want to keep a little distance, like stepping on the chest of a sleeping animal. I shook off the thought and started pitching my tent. And that was when I noticed it the first time. The ground beneath my boots rising and falling almost imperceptibly like a slow inhale, exhale, inhale. I froze, watched, waited. The movement was so faint I thought it might be my imagination, or maybe the shift of my own weight. But then I stepped back, completely still, and it kept moving. A subtle rhythmic swell, a quiet fall, the earth breathing. My stomach tightened. A rational part of my mind tried to explain it. Subsurface water shifting, an underground pocket of air, temperature changes expanding the soil. I tried every explanation I'd ever read. None of them felt right. The movement was too steady, too slow, too alive. But the sun was dropping fast, and I knew better than to hunt for a new campsite after dusk in a dense forest. So I pushed the unease aside. I finished setting up the tent, built a small fire, and made myself dinner. Normal tasks, familiar routines. You can silence fear with routine, but only for a while. As the fire crackled and the shadows stretched across the clearing, I kept glancing at the ground. Was it still moving? Was the rhythm changing? I told myself I needed rest, that exhaustion could twist perceptions. And maybe that was true, until the forest went quiet. You don't realize how much noise a forest makes until all of it stops at once. The chirping, the rustling, The tiny clicks of insects, gone. Silence rolled in like fog. Heavy. Total. Wrong. I sat up straighter, fingers tightening around my mug. The only sound left was my own breathing and something else. A deep, muffled groan from the earth, followed by a subtle tremor beneath me. Not a quake. Not the shift of roots. A shudder. I put my hand on the ground again. And this time I felt it. Not just movement. Warmth. Faint. And pulsing. As if the soil had a heartbeat deep within it. I jerked my hand away and stood quickly, my firelight throwing long, shaking shadows across the trees. My instincts, honed from years of hiking, told me to leave, now, grab my gear, and go. But the clearing felt different now, like stepping away from the firelight would mean stepping into something else's domain, something that wasn't asleep anymore. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think, to steady the panic rising in my chest. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. The air was still, but the forest felt aware of me, as if every pine needle was an eye. I told myself I'd wait it out, keep to the fire, and reassess in the morning. Forests have moods. Sometimes they feel hostile for no reason. Sometimes your mind invents threats in the quiet. That's what I clung to as night fully settled in. But around midnight, I woke to the sensation of movement. Not outside the tent, but beneath it. My sleeping bag shifted slightly, like the ground had rolled under me. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath and listened. The tremor came again, stronger this time, and with it a long, low exhale that vibrated through the soil. It wasn't the sound of wind. It wasn't the creak of trees. It was deep, resonant, organic, like something massive drawing breath under layers of dirt and roots. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent as quietly as I could, and knelt the entrance. The moonlight filtered through the trees, pale and cold. The clearing looked still, but the center, the soft, moss-covered patch where the ground bulged slightly upward, it shifted. I saw it clearly now. A rise, a fall. A shape beneath the earth, slow and deliberate, as if turning slightly under a blanket of soil. My heartbeat hammered in my throat. I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "What are you?" But the forest didn't answer. Something else did. A single, deep thud vibrated through the ground, strong enough to ripple the surface like the skin of a drum. I staggered back. My instincts finally snapped into clarity. I had to leave. Now. And that was when I noticed the trees behind me, not moving, not swaying, but leaning. More than before, angling toward the center of the clearing like they were reacting to whatever lay beneath. And I realized the locals weren't warning me about superstition. They were warning me about territory. The trees seemed to bend closer with each breath of the earth, their trunks subtly angled inward, as if they were being pulled toward the center by a force older and more patient than gravity. I backed away slowly, my boots sinking slightly into the warm, pliant soil. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but there was something about the stillness, something fragile and predatory, that warned me movement might shatter whatever thin barrier existed between observation and involvement. I didn't know if the forest was watching through eyes or through roots, but I felt watched all the same, like a pulse of attention pressed against my skin. The ground's rhythmic swelling grew stronger, more deliberate, like a creature waking from a long, reluctant sleep. The rise came a bit higher. The fall dipped a little deeper. I could hear the soil shifting in microscopic clicks, moss lifting, pebbles adjusting. Beneath all of it was that steady exhalation, a deep, tired sigh that didn't belong to anything I knew. I whispered to myself that it had to be a natural phenomenon, some geological oddity, a pocket of trapped gas. But even as the words formed, I didn't believe them. Nature behaves strangely, but not with intention. And the ground beneath me felt intentional. I reached for my flashlight, but the thought of filling the clearing with artificial light made my skin crawl. Firelight flickers. It blends with the dark. A beam cuts the night in half, and I didn't want to split anything here, didn't want to provoke. So I stayed near the soft crackle of the dying fire, its embers painting faint orange veins across the trembling moss. I needed a plan. My pack wasn't far, just a few steps behind the tent. I could grab it, sling it over my shoulder, and retreat back down the trail. But the idea of walking across the center of the clearing over that slow-breathing swell felt like stepping directly onto a sleeping ribcage. I tried to steady my breathing. In, out, in, out. The forest floor seemed to mimic it, or maybe I was mimicking the forest floor. It was difficult to tell. For a moment, the rhythm matched perfectly, and I felt dizzy, like I wasn't sure where my body ended and the ground began. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to break the pattern. A single deep inhalation, a slow release. The ground continued its own pace, unbothered. A soft crack sounded behind me. I spun. A pine branch had snapped, not fallen, not broken by wind, but twisted until it split cleanly. It dangled from the tree like something had gripped it with too much strength. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No animals, no wind, no explanation. But the forest didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. By what, I couldn't see. Only the presence remained. Heavy, low, spreading through the roots like tension traveling through muscle. I whispered into the cold air, "I'm leaving. I'm not staying here." A murmur rose from the soil, not a voice, not a growl, something like the long, low creak of pressure shifting underground, as if the forest had heard me and was deciding whether to allow it. I took one slow step toward my pack. The ground beneath my boot rose slightly to meet me, like something pushing upward from below. I jerked my foot back, nearly stumbling. The rise subsided. My pulse thundered in my ears. I needed to go. Even if I had to abandon the pack. Even if I walked into the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. I scanned the perimeter for the safest line of retreat, a path that avoided the clearing's center and the newly distorted trees. The old trail was still visible, a faint ribbon of dark earth between the tall trunks. If I could reach it, even half blind in the dark, I'd be safer among the unmoving parts of the forest. I gathered what courage I had left and stepped around the edge of the tent. One step, two, three. The ground stayed still, no breath beneath me. I took another quiet step and then another, the sound of my heartbeat filling the silence. The tree line came closer. 5 more feet, 4, 3. The pack was behind me now, abandoned. I didn't care. My breath came fast and shallow. I could almost touch the nearest pine. I reached out. The ground pulsed violently behind me. Not a slow inhale, a lurch, like something inside the earth snapped awake and pushed upward in one violent motion. The moss rippled, the soil cracked. A rush of warm air erupted from the center of the clearing, the temperature shifting so fast it felt like stepping into the breath of a furnace. I whipped around just in time to see the earth heave upward in a strange, rounded bulge, massive, deliberate, unmistakably alive. My legs froze. Not from fear, from instinct. From the primal command to stay perfectly still when the thing in front of you is larger than your courage. The bulge rose again, taller. The moss peeled away, sliding down like a blanket slipping from a shoulder. The pine trees leaned harder, creaking under the strain of roots being pulled toward the center. I saw the soil stretch, a web of cracks forming around the swelling mound. No shape revealed itself beneath, only movement. A shifting, rolling mass that seemed to decide which direction it wanted to expand. The temperature climbed, warm, damp air pressed against my skin. The sound that followed wasn't a growl, it was a groan. A long, pained groan that vibrated through the clearing and up into the trees, shaking loose clusters of dry needles that drifted down like ashes. That sound was old, older than the forest, older than the names people gave the land. And it didn't sound enraged. It sounded hurt, disturbed, as though my presence had stepped into the path of something that wasn't meant to be seen, wasn't meant to be felt, and certainly wasn't meant to be awakened. The groan tapered into a low hum, and the bulge settled slightly, as if whatever lived beneath was adjusting its weight. Then I felt it, a faint shifting under my feet, even this close to the tree line. Not the slow, rhythmic rise from before, a searching movement, like tendrils of sensation spreading outward through the roots, feeling for me. The forest wasn't alive. The forest was reacting to something alive, and it wanted to know exactly where I stood. A cold realization washed over me. If I ran, the movement would sense it instantly. The vibrations would give me away. I had one advantage, the stillness of the trees behind me. Their roots were anchored deep. Their ground did not move. If I could reach them, step onto that stable earth, I might break whatever connection tied me to the breathing soil. Very slowly, I shifted my weight backward. The ground beneath me quivered as if surprised. I froze. The quiver subsided. I moved again, an inch at a time, heart pounding so loudly I swore the forest could hear it. Another inch, and another, until finally my heel brushed the firmer soil near the base of the pine. The instant my foot touched the stable ground, the clearing reacted. The entire center convulsed, an angry shudder that rippled outward. Moss flew up in a burst, pebbles skittered. A thin crack tore across the surface, stretching toward where I had once stood. Whatever was beneath had recognized the shift, the loss of contact, the escape. I didn't wait. Every instinct I possessed surged through me in one command. Run. I pushed off the pine trunk and bolted down the trail, breath tearing through my lungs, branches whipping at my arms and legs as I plunged into the dark. Behind me, the forest floor roared, a deep, rumbling wave of sound like collapsing earth mixed with something that didn't belong in any natural world. The ground shook under the trees just once, a warning tremor that followed me with terrible clarity. But it did not pursue. It didn't need to. Some places don't chase you. They wait. They wait for the next person who thinks the earth is just earth. The trail twisted under my feet, and I ran until my legs buckled, until the cold night air felt like broken glass in my throat. I collapsed against a fallen log far beyond the clearing's reach, my entire body trembling with adrenaline and disbelief. The woods around me had returned to their natural chorus. The insects, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind, normal sounds, familiar sounds. Almost comforting, almost. Because beneath the ordinary forest breath, I could still sense a deeper rhythm. Not close, but present, as if the land itself was reminding me that I had crossed a boundary I wasn't meant to cross, and survived only because it allowed me to. I sat there for a long time, staring back through the trees, waiting for the ground to move again. Waiting to see if the breathing would follow. It didn't. The forest had settled, the tension had released, but I knew enough to understand that what slept beneath that clearing wasn't gone. It was simply resting again, and the lesson it had given me was carved deeper than any scar. I stayed by that fallen log until my breath finally steadied, though the tremors in my hands refused to fade. My mind kept looping the same questions. What was it? How long had it been there? Why did it move? Why did it breathe? But none of the thoughts came with answers. Only fragments of instinct, flashes of fear, and the heavy sense that I had stepped into a part of the forest that had no interest in explaining itself to me. I wasn't supposed to understand it. I was only supposed to survive it, and even that felt like a mercy I hadn't earned. The night pressed against my skin like cold cloth, tugging me back to the present. I had to choose whether to keep going through the dark or wait until dawn. Neither option felt safe. The clearing was behind me, but the memory of that heaving ground clung to my senses like its warmth had soaked into my bones. Staying in one place felt dangerous, like anything still enough for long enough might draw its attention. But moving blindly through unfamiliar woods held its own risks. Cliffs, ravines, predators, disorientation. Fear distorts direction, and I knew better than to trust the first impulse that came from panic. I forced myself to sit still for several minutes, listening, not for the breathing earth, not for something chase, but for the small, natural signs of a forest that had returned to normal patterns. Crickets chirping in uneven rhythms, the distant hoot of an owl, wind stirring high branches, the gentle drip of condensation from leaf to leaf. Gradually, the real world reclaimed its place around me. Nature's heartbeat, not the one that pulsed beneath that clearing. When I was sure the forest wasn't reacting anymore, I stood slowly, knees aching from the cold. My hands felt clumsy as I dug my compass from my jacket pocket. I had marked my intended route earlier that day. If I continued northeast, I would eventually intersect with a Forest Service road. It wouldn't be a fast journey, not in the dark, not shaken as I was, but it was distance. And distance right then meant safety. I moved carefully, noting each step, each root, each dip in the ground. Part of me expected the earth to pulse beneath my feet again, even out here away from the clearing. But the soil stayed solid, firm, unbreathing. The normal forest floor felt strange now, in its stillness, like the absence of movement was its own kind of ghost. Minutes stretched into an hour. The night deepened. And the deeper I walked, the more a strange clarity settled through me. Not relief, exactly, but a kind of grounded fear. A fear with edges you could navigate around. The worst fear is the one you can't name. Now, at least, I had seen the shape of mine, even if the shape was buried under earth. As the first hints of dawn softened the sky, I reached the service road. The world felt wider instantly, as if the trees loosened their grip on my breath. My legs nearly buckled from the release of tension. Gravel crunched beneath my boots, and the sound was so mundane, so human, it nearly brought tears to my eyes. I followed the road until sunlight finally broke through the canopy in full, turning the morning mist into a thin silver veil. I made it back to my car hours later, exhausted, filthy, shaking, and unable to stop glancing at the ground as if it might lift or sigh beneath me. It didn't. It stayed inert. Normal. As though the previous night had been nothing more than a fever dream. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt, and what had felt me. I drove straight into the nearest town, pulled into a small diner, and sat in a booth with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. The waitress looked at me with that quiet, cautious recognition reserved for people who come out of the woods looking different than they went in. "You all right?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth felt too large, too strange. I shrugged. "Long night." She nodded slowly, as though she'd heard that from hikers before. "Storm get you?" "No," I said softly. "The ground." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, not confusion, but something closer to resignation, like a person hearing a story they didn't want to hear again. She poured more coffee into my cup. "You camp near the hollow?" she asked quietly. My heartbeat stumbled. I don't know what the locals call it. A clearing with a lot of moss. The trees lean in a little. Ground moves. Her eyes lowered to the table. "My grandfather used to tell us never to walk there," she said, barely above a whisper. "Said that land is resting and people shouldn't disturb what rests. Some places weren't meant for footsteps." My stomach nodded. "Do people talk about it?" I asked. "The moving ground?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not enough to matter. Everyone knows the stories, but no one wants to claim they saw anything. Land like that, if you say too much, folks decide you're imagining things, or worse, they decide you're telling the truth." The lights of the diner hummed quietly. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air. But a heaviness hung between us, something older than the linoleum, older than the windows, older than the town itself. I swallowed hard. "What is it? What's underneath?" She met my eyes, and the fear there wasn't directed at me. "No one knows," she said. "No one wants to. They say the forest grows around it instead of over it, like the trees are trying to hide it, or protect it, or keep it asleep." My skin prickled. "Is it dangerous?" I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. "Only if you stay long enough to wake it." The words carried weight, real weight, the kind that settles into your bones the same way the forest floor had risen beneath my palm. I sat there, motionless, feeling the truth of her warning wrap around my mind like frost. I didn't return to that forest again, not physically, but the memory followed me everywhere. In the soft give of a moss patch, in the tremble of soil after heavy rain, in the quiet moments when the world feels too still. Even now, years later, I still catch myself listening to the ground, wondering whether the earth beneath me is truly as silent as it seems, or merely sleeping again. Because the woods taught me something that night. Not everything buried is dead. Not everything asleep is harmless. And not every breath comes from lungs. Some breaths come from deeper places, older places, places that don't recognize us as visitors or intruders. They recognize us only as weight, pressure, disturbance, something pressing where no footsteps belong. And I learned in the most unforgiving way that the land remembers everything that touches it. It remembers pressure. It remembers warmth. It remembers trespass. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear it breathing back. But the strange thing about memory, especially the kind carved under fear, is that it doesn't stay contained. It leaks. It breathes in its own quiet way. And over time, the memory of that night started showing itself in places that shouldn't have carried its weight. Sometimes it happened while I walked along perfectly normal trails, places with dry dirt and ordinary pine needles crunching beneath my boots. I'd stop, sensing something shift beneath me, only to realize the earth was still. The illusion would fade, but the echo remained. It lived in the spaces between steps. I tried ignoring it, telling myself that trauma claws its way into how you interpret the world. But the mind doesn't cling to fear without reason. It clings because something in the deeper parts of you recognizes danger, even years after the danger has passed. I learned to live with it, until the day the forest called me back. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't mystical, it was subtle, like all dangerous invitations. A coworker mentioned they were planning a solo hiking trip and asked if I had recommendations for places with minimal foot traffic. I almost said it without thinking. Don't go near the hollow. The words rose to my mouth, heavy with urgency, but I forced them back down. It wasn't my place to give warnings about land most people didn't believe was strange. I simply suggested another region, a safer place. But the thought lingered, not about them, about me, about why I still carried the memory like a fresh wound. The truth was simple and uncomfortable. Part of me still didn't understand what had happened. And the parts of the human mind that don't understand will keep turning over a mystery until it either makes sense or breaks you. For months, the unease simmered, until finally I couldn't stand it. I had to know more. I told myself I wasn't going back to confront anything. I wasn't chasing answers. I only wanted context, stories, history, something to frame the fear and give it edges instead of infinite darkness. So I returned to the town. Not the forest, just the town. The diner was still there. Same flickering neon sign, same peeling blue paint around the window frames. The same waitress, older, though only by a little, was serving coffee to a couple of hunters at the counter. She didn't recognize me, and I didn't expect her to. Fear changes a person's face more than time does. I took a booth and waited until the morning rush thinned. When she approached, I didn't mention the night by name. I didn't even describe the clearing. I simply asked, "Do people still tell stories about that part of the forest?" Her eyes sharpened, just a fraction. Not fear, recognition. "You mean the old warnings?" she asked. "Yes." She set the coffee pot down and leaned on the table with her forearms. "You don't hear about it much anymore. Younger folks don't listen to old stories. They think it's superstition." "And you?" She hesitated. "I think every story starts somewhere." I nodded. "Was there ever an origin, something that made people afraid of the ground itself?" She glanced around the diner before lowering her voice. "My grandfather used to say the land up there wasn't formed like the rest. Said something happened long before people settled. Something buried itself and the forest grew over it because it had no choice." A chill crept through my ribs. "Buried itself?" She shrugged. "That's the thing. You hear 3 different stories. You get 3 different versions. Some say something died there. Some say something slept. Some say the forest itself shifted around a hollow so deep nobody ever found the bottom. It wasn't the explanation I'd hoped for, but it was the confirmation I needed. The land had a history of being wrong long before I set foot on it. Before I left, she added quietly, "If you're thinking about going back, don't. The forest doesn't forget who walks where." I told her I had no intention of returning. At the time, I meant it. Weeks passed. Life returned to routine. But something had changed in the back of my mind. An itch of a thought. whispering that maybe the land remembered me not with malice, but with acknowledgement. I had felt its breath, its movement, its awareness, and it had felt mine. There was a connection that frightened me, yes, but also drew me in with a gravity I didn't want to examine too closely. That pull came to a head during a storm in early spring. The thunder shook my apartment windows. Rain hammered the roof in waves. I sat awake long after midnight, restless, my heartbeat sinking to the storm's rhythm. And then, it happened. A soft vibration ran up through the wooden floorboards beneath my feet. Not from thunder, not from wind. A vibration too steady, too slow, too familiar. I froze. The storm raged outside, but beneath the noise I heard another sound. Deep, muffled, rhythmic, like a heartbeat traveling up through the foundations of the building. It lasted only 3 or 4 seconds. Then it was gone. Rational explanations flooded my mind. Plumbing, resonance from thunder, the shaking of nearby construction equipment. But each dissolved the moment I examined it. That vibration wasn't external. It wasn't mechanical. It felt like the earth remembering the shape of my footsteps. I barely slept that night, and when the storm ended in the early morning hours, I sat watching the sky brighten, knowing exactly what was waiting for me on the other side of sunrise. A choice. Ignore it and let the memory rot into something shapeless and corrosive, or return, not to challenge the land, not to expose it, but to understand enough to finally let it go. I hated the thought of stepping foot near that forest ever again. But the deeper truth was harder. I couldn't live with a fear I only half understood, not when it had followed me this far. So I prepared, not recklessly, not with bravado, with caution, with respect. I packed light, a compass, extra batteries, food, basic gear, nothing more. I didn't bring camping equipment. I didn't plan to stay long enough to need it. Early the next morning, I drove back toward the region. The highways thinned into rural roads. The rural roads turned into winding gravel paths. The trees grew dense again, familiar in a way that tightened my chest and steadied it at the same time. I reached the edge of the forest just as the sun climbed fully above the horizon. The air was still, too still, as if the woods knew I had returned. I stood at the trailhead, the same trail I had fled down that night, and waited for the fear to overwhelm me. It didn't. The fear was there, yes, strong, cold, heavy, but something else sat beneath it, a quiet resolve. I wasn't here to conquer anything. I was here to listen, to understand, to face what had never been meant for human eyes and accept that some knowledge lives in silence, not explanation. I stepped onto the trail. The forest swallowed the sound of my boots immediately. Each footfall felt like a question. Each breath felt like an answer I wasn't sure I wanted. But I walked on, slowly, deliberately, toward the place where the land had breathed beneath me, and where something beneath the soil had stirred at the shape of my fear. When I finally left the diner and stepped back into the daylight, the world felt thin, like the distance between me and Earth was only a matter of miles, not moments. The sun warmed the pavement under my boots, but even that simple heat felt deceptive, like it could vanish at any second and drop me back into the cold pulse of the forest floor. People walked past, laughing, chattering, going about their day as if the ground was nothing more than dirt, as if it didn't shift in the night, as if it didn't dream beneath them. I tried to pretend that I belonged among them, that I wasn't carrying some piece of the forest still clinging to my heartbeat. But there was something hollow in the way they moved, something unaware. They trusted the earth without question. Their ignorance wasn't bliss, it was armor. And losing that armor in a single night leaves you exposed to things you can't unsee and certainly can't explain. I drove home in silence, the road unwinding beneath me in long gray ribbons. Every bump, every subtle sway of the car made my stomach tighten, as if I'd somehow slipped back onto the shifting soil. I kept checking the rearview mirror, not for headlights, but for the impossible. A rise in the asphalt behind me, a low swell of shadow following the car. Nothing appeared, of course, but the fear sat with me like an unwelcome passenger the whole drive. When I reached my house and stepped onto the concrete walkway, I actually paused, staring down at the ground. Solid, cold, unmoving. But certainty didn't come as easily anymore. I crouched, pressed my palm against it, and waited. Nothing. Still, I felt foolish doing it, like I'd brought part of the forest's paranoia home with me. And perhaps I had. That night, as I lay in my bed, the quiet of my own house felt strangely oppressive. The refrigerator's hum, the settling of the walls, the faint creak of the frame when I shifted my weight. Every tiny vibration felt amplified. Each crackle in the silence made my muscles tense. I had escaped the forest, but the forest hadn't fully let go of my mind. And then, somewhere around 2 a.m, I woke suddenly, heart pounding, convinced, absolutely convinced, that the mattress beneath me had moved. Only a fraction. Only slightly. But enough. Enough that I bolted upright, breath caught in my throat, hands gripping the sheets. The room was still. The darkness was ordinary. But my body felt like it had been pulled out of sleep by something older than nightmares. I forced myself to get up. I walked through the house. I checked every door and window. I stood barefoot in the middle of the living room, the hardwood floor cool against my skin. And I waited, listening, feeling, trying to sense whether ground itself had followed me home. It hadn't. Not physically, but something had. A question. A haunting. A pressure in the mind that comes from touching a place you were never meant to touch. Days passed, then weeks. I tried to return to my routines, work, errands, small talk, the rituals that fill a life. But whenever my foot landed on soft soil, parks, trails, the edge of a garden, I'd feel the faintest echo of that clearing. The memory wasn't visual. It was tactile. A phantom rising beneath my heel. A ghost breath of warm air brushing my ankle. A reminder. The forest hadn't hurt me. It hadn't chased me. It hadn't tried to claim me. It had simply let me know it was there. That was somehow worse. One afternoon, months later, I found myself back in the town closest to the forest. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was passing through, that it was convenient, that I wasn't drawn back. But when you lie to yourself, your body always knows better. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the old diner, the forest road hidden beyond it. I wasn't going back in. I knew that with absolute clarity. But part of me had to know whether others knew the truth, or if they'd buried it like the thing beneath the clearing. So I walked into the small ranger station across from the general store. A middle-aged man was behind the desk, sorting trail maps. He looked up with that polite, practiced smile of someone who'd seen every type of hiker. "Help you with something?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "I was hiking out toward the hollow a while back," I said cautiously, "near a clearing with a lot of moss. The ground felt strange." The ranger's smile didn't fade, but it flattened, just slightly, a tightening at the corners, a recognition he didn't want to admit. "Strange how?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I inhaled, like it was moving under me. He didn't blink, didn't scoff, didn't question my sanity. He just looked at me the way a doctor looks at someone describing a rare symptom. Unexpected, but not unfamiliar. "There are places out there we advise people not to camp," he said quietly. "Bad soil, shifts in the land, unstable pockets." I shook my head. "This wasn't unstable," I whispered. "It was breathing." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation. After a long moment, he said, "Some land isn't meant for tents or for feet. Or for curiosity." My skin prickled. Then what is it meant for? He folded the map carefully, aligning each edge with deliberate precision. "Rest," he said. "Just rest." The same word the waitress had used. Rest. A word that should bring comfort, but instead carried the weight of something vast and dormant and watching. I thanked him, though I didn't know why, and left the station with a hollow feeling in my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. A recognition that the world still held places that refused to fit into our maps or explanations. Places that existed quietly, indifferent to us, but responsive enough to remind us that we are the intruders, not the explorers. That night, as I lay in bed again, I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breath. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I felt the faintest shift beneath me. Not enough to startle me upright. Not enough to send my pulse racing. Just enough to remind me the forest hadn't followed me home. It didn't need to. Because once you've stood on breathing earth, once you've felt the pulse of something buried but alive, the memory takes root. Quiet, patient, waiting. Not to haunt you, but to teach you. Teach you that the world is layered. That life isn't just what grows on the surface. That some things sleep for reasons we were never meant to disturb. And that sometimes the lesson isn't about fear at all. It's about humility. It's about knowing that beneath our boots lies a world older than our footsteps. A world with its own rhythms, its own boundaries, and its own long, slow breath. It's about learning that we are not the first to walk these forests, and we will not be the last, but the land decides who it remembers. And I know with a certainty I will carry until the day that the breathing forest floor remembers me. For months after I left that forest, I tried to fold myself back into ordinary life, but something had changed in the fabric of my awareness. I found myself scanning the ground wherever I went, parking lots, hiking trails, even my own backyard, searching for the faintest hint of movement beneath the soil. Rationally, I knew it made no sense. But fear doesn't care about reason. It cares about memory. And mine had been carved by something too ancient and too deliberate to ignore. The hardest part wasn't the fear. It was the silence. The silence of a secret that didn't belong to me. I'd hear people talk about wildlife encounters, strange sounds in the woods, unsettling hikes, and every part of me wanted to interrupt them, to warn them. You haven't seen the ground breathe. You haven't heard the soil groan beneath your boots. But I never did. Not because I feared being laughed at, but because I feared someone believing me enough to go looking. Some truths are safer as shadows, but the forest wasn't done with me. Not yet. It returned in dreams first. Not nightmares. Not exactly. More like visions that bled into waking thought. I would see moss shifting ever so slightly, rising in that slow rhythm, the inhale-exhale pattern that had imprinted itself into the deepest part of my memory. I could feel the warmth of the soil spreading across my palm, that subtle, living pulse radiating through it. The forest came back to me not as a monster in the dark, but as a presence, patient, watchful, waiting. The dreams grew stronger as winter approached. Colder nights brought sharper recollections. I began waking with the sensation that the bed beneath me was lifting in slow, subtle waves. I'd snap upright, heart hammering, palms pressed flat against the mattress, only to find stillness, silence. Nothing but the echo of a memory burrowed into my nerves. Then came the morning when the dream wasn't a dream. I walked across my living room, groggy and unfocused, when I felt it, the faintest shift under the floorboards. Not enough to be a quake. Not enough to be structural, settling, just enough to make my breath seize in my throat. I froze, every muscle stiffening the way they had in that clearing. But the sensation didn't repeat. The floor stayed quiet, still, harmless. I stood there for several minutes, waiting for movement, listening for that deep subterranean hum that had shaken the forest. Nothing. And yet, something in me knew this wasn't my imagination. It wasn't a recurrence. It was a reminder. A whisper from the earth itself. That night, I drove to the edge of town where the fields stretched flat and wide. I stepped out of the car and pressed my hand to the cold ground. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But the silence felt different now. Emptier somehow, as if the forest had created a space inside me where the breathing earth had once been. A place like a scar. A memory without a wound to point to. I didn't return to the forest, but the forest followed me in quiet ways. I'd hear a deep creak underground during a storm and feel my pulse quicken. I'd see mist gather low over the ground on early mornings and remember the clearing's heaving silhouette. Every small tremor of the natural world felt alive, intentional. Then, months later, something happened that pushed the memory from the back of my mind into stark, immediate reality. I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a former hiking partner, someone I trusted with trail routes and backcountry decisions. His message was short, but it cut through me the moment I read it. Did you ever camp near the hollow? Someone's missing out there. My breath caught. He didn't know my story, not the real one. I had told no one, but he knew the general region I liked to camp in. He'd heard the locals mention the name, and that message was enough to make something deep in my gut twist. Missing. The word echoed in my mind like a stone dropping into water. I called him immediately, and he picked up on the first ring. His voice sounded strained. "They found his pack," he said. "But not him. Not Prince either. Just depressions in the moss, like the ground pulled down where he stepped." Cold surged through me, flooding my limbs with the kind of fear that isn't born of imagination but recognition, a memory stirring awake. "What do you mean, depressions?" I asked quietly. "Like footsteps," he replied, "but too deep, as if the soil swallowed his weight. Some people think he fell into a soft patch, but the ground didn't collapse. There's no sinkhole, no opening, just those weird indentations, like he was walking on something soft that gave way only under him." He paused, then added, "They said it looked like the ground was breathing." My throat tightened. I knew then, without question, that he was gone, not because he'd wandered off, not because he'd slipped or gotten lost, but because he had stepped where something was sleeping, and something ancient had responded. The guilt hit me next. I should have warned someone, told someone. I had treated my story like a private haunting, something to be carried silently, but I had never considered the consequence of that silence. How many people had walked into that clearing thinking it was just another patch of moss? How many had felt a warm pulse beneath their boots and assumed it was nothing? How many hadn't walked back out? That night, after talking to him, I couldn't sleep. Every sound of my house settling, every faint vibration from distant traffic, every sigh of the wind felt like the ground shifting underneath my mattress. I finally sat up, swung my legs over the edge, and stared at the floor in the dark. There is a moment in every story, every encounter with the unknown, where fear becomes responsibility, where surviving something isn't enough because the cost of silence becomes heavier than the memory itself. I had reached that moment, and as much as I wanted to turn away from it, pretend the breathing ground was just a terrible night in the woods, I couldn't. Some truths stay buried only when no one disturbs them. But the moment someone else starts sinking into the same unearthed danger, that truth rises again, whether you want it to or not. I realized I couldn't change what had happened to the missing hiker, but I could change what happened next. I could become the warning the locals never fully voiced. I could become the echo that kept others from stepping where I had stepped. The ground might breathe, but so do we, and breath is meant to be shared, especially when it carries a warning. The decision weighed on me for days, but each sunrise made the choice clearer. I needed to go back, not to the clearing, to the town, to the people who lived closest to the woods, to the ones who still remembered the stories whispered by grandparents and passed casually to hikers who never listened. I needed to understand what they feared, what they avoided, what they had learned to live beside. And maybe in doing so, I could help protect those who wandered too close to the edge of something they couldn't comprehend. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a boundary, a threshold between what humans think they know and what nature has chosen not to reveal. I had crossed that threshold once and survived. Now I had to cross it again, not as a hiker, not as an adventurer, but as a witness to something that should have stayed beneath the soil, a witness to something alive, a witness to a truth that was waking again. And I knew, deep down, with a cold certainty, that the forest was waiting, not for me, for the next step, for the next trespass, for the next breath. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that the memory would fade, that what happened in that clearing would eventually dissolve into the same mental drawer as nightmares and misremembered dreams. But memory doesn't work like that. Not when the fear wasn't imagined, not when the ground itself rose to meet your hand. The experience stayed with me in quiet, creeping ways. It lived in the pauses between footsteps. It lived in the places inside me where instinct curls up and listens to things logic refuses to acknowledge. Months after that night, when the shock had worn down into something colder and quieter, I found myself back near that region, not inside the forest, not anywhere close to the clearing, but in a nearby town doing research for a project unrelated to hiking. Even then, even standing on pavement miles from the tree line, I felt a tension humming under my ribs. A part of me expected the ground to shift. It never did. But the fear didn't leave. It simply changed shape, becoming less about danger and more about understanding, if understanding was even possible. One evening, while speaking with a local historian, the topic drifted toward old trails and forgotten folklore. She talked about the land the way some people talk about ancient relatives, respectfully, carefully, as though it were alive in a way that demanded courtesy. When I asked her about the hollow, she didn't laugh or dismiss it. She didn't lean in with excitement either. She just grew very quiet. There are places, she said slowly, where the land isn't just land. It's memory. Layers and layers of it, pressed together. Some memories sink deep, some rise, and some breathe. I felt the air catch in my throat. You've heard of it? She nodded. My grandmother warned me never to step on the moss beds in that valley. Said the roots there don't anchor downward, they anchor around something. I swallowed hard. Something like what? Something the forest grew with, she said. Not over, with. She paused, eyes narrowing as if weighing whether to continue. People think the earth is dead under their feet, but soil is the most ancient body we've ever touched, and sometimes bodies remember how to move. It was the closest thing to an explanation I had ever heard, yet it somehow made everything feel even more mysterious. As if what I encountered was not an anomaly, but a remnant. A reminder that the world is older than our names for it, older than our stories, older than our assumptions that we've mapped all the living things. That night, alone in my room, I lay awake long after the town had gone silent. Every time a truck rumbled down the highway, I felt a faint vibration through the bedframe, and my mind immediately transported me back to that clearing, to the moss swelling under moonlight, to the warmth rising through my fingers, to the groan of earth that sounded heartbreakingly alive. I realized then that what terrified me most wasn't the idea of something monstrous sleeping beneath the soil. What terrified me was the possibility that it wasn't monstrous at all. What if it was simply living in a way we were never meant to witness? What if we weren't intruding upon a creature, but a cycle? A breath not intended for human observation? The fear I'd carried slowly softened into something else. Reverence. A trembling respect for a place that existed entirely outside human understanding, human power, human ownership. The forest had not chased me. It had not punished me. It had only stirred because I stepped where I shouldn't have. It reacted, nothing more, nothing less, and it had let me leave. That truth settled in my chest with a weight I still feel to this day. People always ask what the most dangerous part of the wilderness is. The wildlife, the weather, the isolation, the terrain. They rarely consider the land itself. The ground we assume is solid, inert, passive. But the ground is none of those things. It is as alive as the canopy above it. It shifts, it changes, it remembers. And on rare occasions in places untouched by roads or maps, it reveals just how deep its memory goes. I never returned to the hollow lungs. I know better now. Not out of fear of death, but out of fear of disrespecting something that deserves more reverence than any mountain or river I've ever crossed. Some places don't want to be understood. Some want only to be left alone, to breathe in peace, beneath untouched moss, beneath centuries of roots, beneath the silence of a world that doesn't listen closely enough. But every once in a while, when the wind moves through the trees just right, when the forest floor softens under my boots on a damp morning, I am reminded of that night. And I remember what it felt like to kneel in a clearing and feel the heartbeat of something older than time rising through my palm. And in that memory, there is fear. Yes, but also awe. Awe at the reminder that we are visitors in a world far larger and stranger than anything we've built on top of it. Awe at the reality that the land beneath us is not empty. It is alive. and it listens far more closely than we think. So when I tell this story to other hikers, I don't tell it to scare them. I tell it to remind them of humility, the kind of humility the woods will carve into you if you forget your place. I tell them that the forest is not a backdrop. It is not a playground. It is not a resource. It is a breathing thing, ancient and powerful, and if you are lucky enough to walk its paths, you walk on permission, not ownership. Because the night I stood on the breathing forest floor, I learned a truth that reshaped everything I thought I knew about wilderness. The earth is not beneath us. We are the ones on its surface. We are the ones passing through its lungs. And if you ever feel the ground shift under your feet, if you ever feel warmth rising through the moss, if you ever sense something stirring deep below the roots, do not linger. Do not question it. Do not wait for a second breath. Step back gently. Leave quietly and hope, truly hope, that whatever lies beneath the soil chooses to sleep again, because the forest remembers every footstep, and some memories, some breaths, are not meant for us to disturb. I've always chased the kind of solitude you can only find miles from asphalt, far from the hum of city life. That's why I agreed to this hike with my two friends, Megan and Kyle. We weren't exactly experienced hikers, but we weren't amateurs either. Weekends like this, we told ourselves, were a chance to reset, to forget phones, emails, the constant pressure of life. The trailhead was tucked into a fold of the Appalachian Mountains I hadn't been to before. The air smelled like wet earth and old leaves, a scent that makes you feel alive and vaguely uneasy at the same time. A thin mist hung over the trail, rising from the damp forest floor, clinging to the trunks of birch and maple trees like cobwebs. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered shafts, illuminating dust motes that swirled lazily around our boots as we began the hike. From the outset, everything seemed normal. Too normal, almost. The first half mile was the usual mix of chatter and footfalls on packed dirt. Megan complained about a sore ankle, and Kyle laughed at the idea of mountain yoga being good for her balance. I carried the camera, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to capture the way light fell through the leaves. And then I noticed it. A thin layer of pine needles, fresh and oddly fragrant, scattered across the path. I frowned. None of the trees nearby were pines. There were only maples, birches, and a few oaks that had shed their leaves weeks ago. I mentioned it casually. Must have blown in from somewhere, Kyle said without much interest, kicking at a small pile. Yeah, maybe, I replied, though I couldn't shake the nagging sense that it didn't belong here. The needles weren't random either. They formed an almost deliberate pattern. Arrows. Each small cluster pointed deeper into the forest, away from the main trail, toward a section that didn't appear on any map we had. I called the others over, pointing them out. Megan shrugged. Probably some hunter's mark, she said, but her tone didn't carry conviction. Kyle, always more daring, suggested we follow them for a bit, just to see where they led. I felt a flicker of unease, but nodded. There was nothing inherently dangerous about walking a few hundred feet off trail, especially if we stayed aware. We followed the arrows, our boots crunching over the needles. The forest began to change. The trees grew taller and closer together, the light dimming as if the sun itself was wary of following us. Every step felt like a descent into a deeper, older world, one where human maps and signs held no sway. Birds had vanished, their chirping replaced by a tense, almost reverent silence that pressed against the edges of my mind. After maybe 20 minutes, the main trail disappeared entirely. The pine needles thickened, carpeting the dirt in unnatural density. They were clean, almost luminous in the filtered sunlight. It was beautiful in a way that made my stomach tighten. We reached a small clearing, roughly circular, no larger than a backyard, and every arrow pointed forward toward a dense wall of trees. I don't like this, Megan whispered. She'd slowed her pace, her eyes darting from one shadowed grove to another. Relax, I said, though my voice felt hollow even to my own ears. We're fine. We just follow the arrows a bit, then we'll loop back. But as I said it, I realized there was something wrong with the air itself. It was heavier here, humid in a way that made every inhale taste like wet soil. A faint wind stirred, though the trees were still, and the scent, the pine scent, had intensified, sweet and sharp, almost cloying. Kyle knelt and scooped up a handful of the needles, letting them fall slowly through his fingers. "Weird," he said. "They're fresh, like they just fell." I bent down, brushing a small patch aside. The soil underneath was strange, dark, almost black, soft in a way that seemed wrong. There were no roots, no rocks, just dirt, perfectly level and unnervingly silent. I couldn't hear a bird, a squirrel, or the distant babble of the creek we'd passed earlier. Just us, breathing, stepping, moving forward. I felt it then, a prickling at the base of my skull, a tightening in my chest. My gut told me to turn around, to call this off, to retreat to the mapped trail. But the arrows, they seemed to insist. They demanded we go further. I glanced at Kyle and Megan. Kyle seemed fascinated, leaning forward to trace one arrow with a finger. Megan's face was pale, lips pressed together, gripping her trekking poles like a lifeline. I wanted to tell them we should leave, but the arrows, they were hypnotic. Step by step, we advanced. As we walked, the forest changed subtly but disturbingly. The birches and maples gave way to darker trunks, knotted and twisted. Moss hung thick from branches, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift just beyond the edge of vision. Every few meters, the arrows grew larger, as if impatient for our progress. I tried to focus on small, rational details. The birds are gone because it's late morning, the needles are simply carried by some natural phenomenon, the path might eventually loop back to the main trail. But logic was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a creeping awareness that this part of the forest was not right. And then I noticed movement. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of something just beyond a tree trunk, a shadow that seemed to retreat when I looked directly at it. Megan whispered my name, and I jerked back, catching her alarmed gaze. "I saw it too," she said. "Something's there." Kyle laughed nervously. "It's probably a deer or a raccoon. Just stop thinking about it." But I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me that we weren't alone. The forest seemed to breathe around us, alive in ways I didn't understand. And all the while, the arrows urged us forward, deeper into the unknown. I checked the time on my watch. We'd been off the main trail for less than an hour. It didn't feel that short. And then as we stepped over a fallen branch, the forest opened up into a second clearing. This one was larger, nearly circular, but unlike the first, there was something at its center, a crude wooden post, stripped of bark, embedded in the earth, with a single arrow of pine needles pointing directly at it. I froze. There was a faint odor, earth, but also something metallic like iron. Kyle stepped closer, peering at the post. Megan grabbed my arm. "I don't like this," she said again, voice trembling. "We shouldn't be here." I nodded, but curiosity, that dangerous human curiosity, burned inside me. I stepped toward the post, careful not to disturb the arrows. The closer I got, the stronger the metallic smell became, mingled now with the pine. I knelt, brushing a hand along the ground, and felt something. It was carved into the soil beneath the post, shallow marks arranged in a circle. I couldn't make sense of them at first. Then the realization hit. They weren't random. They were symbols, lines, arcs, patterns that seemed to form some primitive, deliberate language. And the closer I looked, the more I felt the weight of them, the intent behind them, as if the forest itself had pressed them there. I heard Megan gasp behind me. I turned sharply. Her face was pale, lips moving silently, staring at something I couldn't see. Kyle's eyes had gone wide, focused on the tree line beyond the clearing. I followed his gaze, and then I saw it. Movement. But not like a deer or raccoon. Slow. Intentional. Sliding between the trees just beyond the clearing. Watching us. Waiting. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its outline was humanoid, but it was twisted, unnatural, and somehow wrong. The branches seemed to bend slightly around it, like the forest itself was acknowledging it, yielding to it. I felt my stomach twist. My hands shook. Megan whispered my name again, louder this time, and Kyle finally stepped back. The arrows. They hadn't led us here by accident. They had guided us into this place. and whatever was out there in the darkened edge of the trees had been waiting. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and follow the trail back. But the forest had changed. I realized with a sinking feeling that the path behind us, the one we had walked in on, was gone, covered now with fresh pine needles pointing forward, always forward. The air tightened around me, pressing into my lungs. I felt trapped, and I knew in that moment that leaving might not be as simple as turning around. Something had us in its orbit, and it didn't want us to go. We didn't move at first. The three of us stood in that clearing, staring at the edges of the forest as if that alone could protect us. The figure, or whatever it was, didn't move forward, didn't vanish. It just lingered, twisted and unnatural, as if rooted in the shadows themselves. I finally forced my legs to respond. "We follow the arrows," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just keep going. Maybe it leads somewhere safe." Megan shook her head violently. "Safe? There's nothing safe about this. I want to go back." I looked behind me, toward the trail we had come in on, only to realize she was right. The pine needles covered everything, forming arrows that pointed relentlessly deeper into the forest. The main path was gone. My stomach churned with the realization that we weren't just off the trail. We were being funneled, guided into this place by some force we didn't understand. Kyle muttered something about staying calm and started walking, brushing aside the unease with his usual bravado. I followed, keeping an eye on the tree line. Megan hesitated for a moment, then forced herself to step forward, her hands trembling. The forest seemed to change again almost immediately. The trees grew denser, their trunks gnarled and blackened as if scorched. Moss hung in thick curtains, brushing our shoulders. Every sound we made, breathing, footsteps, the rustle of clothing, sounded louder than it should, echoing unnaturally. And then the silence hit. It wasn't just quiet, it was a living absence of sound, pressing down, weighing on our ears. Birds didn't call, insects didn't buzz, even the wind seemed to have died. My heartbeat filled the void, loud enough that I was certain it thudded in Megan's and Kyle's ears as well. I stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Kyle shook his head. "Hear what?" I took a deep breath, straining. At first there was nothing, and then soft, almost imperceptible, something scraped against bark, slow, deliberate, coming from multiple directions at once. Megan gasped. "I told you, something's here." We moved cautiously, the pine needle arrows beneath our feet guiding us deeper. Each arrow seemed fresher than the last, as if the forest itself was replenishing them to keep us on the path. I realized I could smell it even more strongly now. The pine, so sweet it was almost suffocating, and that metallic tang, like blood, faint but persistent. As we walked, I noticed small changes. Branches that shouldn't have been broken were snapped at angles, low to the ground. Footprints, though not human, pressed into the dirt beside the needles. They were elongated, narrow, with toes too long to belong to any animal I'd seen. I pointed them out, and Kyle knelt, brushing dirt from the prints. "These aren't animals," he said, his voice tight, "or humans." I wanted to argue, to rationalize it, but the feeling in my gut told me it didn't matter. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a creature. It was deliberate, watching, leading us. Then our first item went missing. Megan's backpack, the one she never let out of her sight, was gone. She had been carrying it on her back only minutes before. I spun around, searching the shadows, my pulse skyrocketing. "Where did it go?" she demanded, panic creeping into her voice. "I had it." We backtracked a few steps, but the backpack wasn't anywhere to be found. No sign it had been moved by animals. The forest floor was too clean. Only pine needles, more arrows, and the strange, twisted footprints. "That's impossible," Kyle muttered, brushing a trembling hand over his eyes. "It was just here." A rustling sounded from above, soft, deliberate, like a branch being bent and released. But when we looked, nothing moved. The forest didn't feel like it belonged to us anymore. It belonged to something else entirely. I realized then that the arrows weren't just guiding us, they were controlling us. Every step we took felt inevitable, as if we had no choice but to follow them, even as fear clawed at our throats. We pressed on, deeper and deeper, the silence thickening. At times I thought I heard whispers, soft and fleeting, like wind through the pines, but with cadence and intent. Kyle heard them too. I could tell from the way his head jerked sharply in every direction. Megan refused to acknowledge them, burying her face in her hands. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time had become meaningless. The forest had swallowed any sense of distance or direction. We moved blindly, led by pine needle arrows that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Every now and then, the arrows would cluster in strange patterns, forming shapes I couldn't comprehend, symbols that seemed to pulse with silent energy. Then came the first disappearance. I turned to check on Megan and realized she had stopped walking. I called her name. No response. I spun around. She was gone. Just gone. The forest behind us was empty. No backpack, no footprints, no sound. Only the pine needles pointing forward. "Kyle!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "She was right here." He grabbed my arm. "We can't stop. We can't go back. Keep moving." I wanted to argue, to search, but the arrows insisted. Forward, forward, and so we walked, my stomach in knots, each step heavier than the last. The forest felt alive in every sense, watching, anticipating. The shadows between the trees seemed to stretch and twist when I glanced their way, like dark fingers reaching for us, but always retreating just beyond reach. And then the wind came. Not a natural wind. It carried voices, faint but urgent, crying, whispering, sometimes laughing. It moved through the treetops, through the needles under our feet, rustling the symbols carved into the soil. I couldn't tell if it was Megan calling or something else. I wanted to stop, to scream, but this path of pine needles pulled me forward. Kyle didn't hesitate. Neither did I. By the time we reached the next clearing, the forest had changed again. Trees were taller, trunks impossibly straight, bark blackened and cracked, yet the forest floor was immaculate, covered in perfect fresh pine needles. Shadows clung to the edges, deeper and darker than any natural shade. And I knew we weren't alone. Something was here, watching, guiding, waiting, and I had no idea if we would ever leave. The clearing felt impossibly still, the kind of stillness that presses against your skin and makes your own heartbeat thunder in your ears. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, blackened trunks twisting unnaturally toward the sky. Kyle kept moving forward without hesitation, eyes fixed on the faint arrows carved into the pine needles. I followed, though my legs shook, every step like walking through water. The wind carried faint whispers again, soft, distant, impossible to locate. They weren't words I could understand. They were syllables, fragments of language, rising and falling in urgent patterns. Sometimes I thought I heard Megan's voice among them, crying for help. I wanted to scream back, to call her name. But the air seemed to absorb all sound. Only the pine needles beneath our feet crunched audibly, a terrible, echoing punctuation to the silence. Something changed after that clearing. The forest began to feel wrong in a new way. The trees were closer together, their branches forming near impassable walls. The path of needles curved, split, and then reformed, guiding us down corridors that shouldn't exist. At one point, we stumbled into a depression in the earth, almost like a hollow, and the air was thick with the scent of damp pine and something else, rot. Kyle's hand brushed against a tree, and he recoiled sharply. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "What?" I asked, but I already knew. A face had pressed against the bark for a fraction of a second, human-like but wrong, stretched, elongated, pale. Then it vanished. Only the gnarled bark remained, and the shadow it had left behind seemed to pulse, lingering longer than it should. I swallowed hard. "We're not alone," I said. My own voice sounded foreign to me, small, weak. We pressed on. I couldn't stop watching the tree line, the shadows, the way the forest seemed to rearrange itself just out of our peripheral vision. Every now and then I would glance down at the path of needles. They weren't random anymore. They formed symbols I couldn't recognize, circles, lines, arrows within arrows, spirals pointing inward, and sometimes I swore they moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. Then it happened, our first real warning. Kyle had stopped to examine a cluster of the pine needles that had formed an arrow pointing toward a small hollow between two blackened trunks. As he knelt, I saw something brush past him in the corner of my eye, a shape moving quickly, sliding between the trees. He didn't notice. I grabbed his arm, but before I could speak, the shape was gone, leaving only a faint scent of metallic pine. Kyle jumped up. "What?" "Nothing," I said, but my voice trembled. "Keep moving." We walked in tense silence, broken only by the soft crunch of needles and the occasional rustle in the shadows. And then the second disappearance happened. I realized Kyle was no longer beside me. My eyes darted around the clearing we had just entered. He had vanished, just like Megan. I stumbled forward, calling his name, my voice cracking. Only the whispers answered, rising in intensity, circling around me. I spun, searching the blackened trees, the shadows, the paths of needles. But he was gone. A cold realization struck me. This forest didn't want us to leave, and whatever force controlled it had taken them. I backed into a tree, breathing hard. My hands shook as I ran them over the smooth, blackened bark. The needles beneath my feet formed a spiral, pointing inward, deeper into the hollow of the forest. Against every instinct, I followed. The spiral led to a small depression in the earth, almost like a natural amphitheater, with walls of trees pressing in. At the center, I saw something impossible. Megan and Kyle, or what had been them. They stood motionless, heads tilted unnaturally toward the ground, limbs stiff. Their eyes were open, but empty, hollowed out, reflecting only the shadows of the trees. A faint layer of pine needles clung to their hair and clothes, fresh and fragrant, almost glowing in the dim light. I stepped forward, voice trembling. "Megan? Kyle." They didn't respond. I reached out to touch Megan's shoulder, and the moment my fingers brushed her coat, she jerked violently backward like a puppet with broken strings. The hollow whispered around me, a chorus of voices rising, falling, urging, warning, laughing. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The needles beneath my feet shifted, rearranging themselves, forming arrows that pointed down, toward the soil. The hollow seemed to breathe, and I realized that the floor of the clearing was no longer earth. It was soft, moving as if alive. Roots and vines pulsed beneath the surface, forcing me back. A shadow detached itself from the tree line, a figure taller than any human, with elongated limbs and a featureless face, smooth and pale. Its head tilted in a curious, deliberate way, as if examining me. The pine scent intensified, choking, overwhelming. The whispers became words, jagged fragments that I could almost understand. Stay, follow, join, forever. I turned to run, but the path of needles shifted. Arrows formed behind me, pointing backward, but the forest had closed in. Every step I took forward was mirrored by the twisting, living shadows, keeping me trapped. My legs burned, lungs screaming for air, and I realized I was alone, completely. The hollow's whispers grew louder, and the shadows reached toward me. I stumbled, falling into the soft, living floor, and felt it pull at my hands, legs trying to drag me down. The figure glided closer, slow, deliberate, its head tilting, faceless. Desperation took over. I screamed, scrambled, kicked, clawed my way to my feet, and ran. Blind, frantic, guided only by the ever-present arrows of pine needles pointing deeper into the unknown. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of gnarled trees, shadowed hollows, and whispering needles. And I knew this. The forest didn't let you leave. Not if it wanted to keep you. I ran into the darkness, the scent of pine thick in my lungs, the whispers following, echoing, repeating. Somewhere ahead there would be another clearing, another spiral, another test, and I had no choice but to follow, hoping against reason that it might lead to escape. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I didn't know how long I ran. Hours? Minutes? Time had lost all meaning. The forest pressed around me, close and suffocating, and the pine needle arrows stretched endlessly ahead, each one sharper, brighter, more insistent. The whispers became voices, clearer now, mocking, pleading, commanding. I couldn't tell whose voices they were anymore, or if they were human at all. I stumbled into another clearing. Unlike the previous ones, this one was massive, almost cathedral-like, encircled by impossibly tall trees. The ground was perfectly level, carpeted entirely with pine needles. At the center stood a crude altar, rough-hewn logs stacked in a triangular formation, dripping with a dark sap that smelled like iron and rot. Shadows swirled around it, pooling unnaturally, as if the forest itself were alive and breathing. And then I saw them, Megan and Kyle, or rather the shells of them, lined up along the edge of the clearing. Their heads were tilted unnaturally to one side, eyes empty, faces pale and still. The closer I got, the more I realized their bodies weren't quite right. Limbs too long, fingers too thin, skin stretched and shiny in the filtered light. I wanted to scream, but the forest wouldn't let me. The air was thick, almost viscous, pressing into my throat and lungs. The whispers became commands. Join, forever, follow, follow. A shadow moved across the clearing, gliding rather than walking. Its head tilted, featureless, and its limbs were impossibly long. It stopped near the altar, raising what could loosely be called a hand. The pine needle arrows seemed to pulse in response, forming new paths across the clearing floor. I felt them drawing me closer, inexorably, as if my body no longer belonged to me. "No," I whispered, stumbling back. "I won't." But the forest didn't care. Something scraped across the hollowed ground behind me, a low, grinding sound like fingernails against stone. I turned, and the shadows between the trees condensed into forms. Figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces sliding across the earth with predatory grace. They didn't run. They drifted, gliding forward silently, their presence pressing against the edges of my mind. I ran. The arrows of pine needles seemed to multiply, splitting in weavings via forming paths that didn't make sense, paths that looped, spiraled, and then ended in walls of blackened trunks. The forest was alive. It didn't just guide. It trapped. It fed on fear. Every step I took brought whispers, visions, sensations I couldn't name, snatches of memory that weren't mine, voices screaming, crying, begging. I tripped over a root, falling hard into a depression filled with pine needles. As I scrambled up, I noticed movement beneath the needles, something shifting, alive. I froze. Tiny, pale fingers emerged from the ground, wriggling toward me. I kicked them back, scrambled upright, and ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, the whispers screaming louder. Ahead, the trees thinned slightly, revealing a narrow path framed by twisted trunks. The pine needle arrows pointed forward, insistent, almost desperate. I had no choice but to follow, and then the forest changed again. It wasn't just dark anymore. It was distorted. Trees leaned at impossible angles, shadows twisted unnaturally. The ground beneath my feet rose and fell in wave-like patterns, impossible hills and valleys shifting as if the earth itself were breathing. The whispers had become a chorus, overlapping, overlapping, overlapping. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or hundreds. It didn't matter. They all said the same thing. Follow. Don't stop. Join ever. I stumbled, falling into a hollow so deep it seemed bottomless. The shadows of the trees stretched over me, pooling, reaching, grasping. I could feel the air vibrate with the presence of something vast, ancient, malevolent. And then I saw her. Megan, or a version of her, stood at the edge of a shadowed pit, her head tilted unnaturally, body rigid. But her eyes were empty, black pits that reflected nothing, not even the dim light. She raised a hand, beckoning me. I screamed, stumbling backward. The whispers surged, louder, almost deafening. Join, join, follow, forever. I turned, running again, but the forest shifted beneath me. Paths I had just walked reformed behind me, closing off. Branches twisted like living hands, blocking escape. Every step I took felt wrong, the world itself bending, reshaping to prevent my flight. I reached another clearing, smaller, tighter, suffocating. At its center, the shadowed figure waited. Featureless face tilted, limbs elongated, its presence radiating inevitability. The pine needle arrows converged at its feet, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. I realized something horrifying. The arrows weren't just guiding us. They were feeding the forest. Each time we followed them, each time we obeyed, the forest grew stronger, the shadows more confident, the whispers louder, and now it wanted me. I didn't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight against the inevitability. But deep down, I knew resistance alone wouldn't save me. The forest had already claimed Megan and Kyle, and it had claimed the path behind me. I took a step forward, The arrows pulsed beneath my boots, urging, insisting. The shadows swirled, condensing, observing. My chest burned, lungs gasping, and yet my legs moved. I was moving whether I wanted to or not. Ahead, the figure tilted its head further, reaching out. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, overlapping in hundreds of tongues. Join forever, follow forever, join. And then everything went black. I don't remember falling or if I even did. All I knew was that I woke somewhere else, or maybe it wasn't somewhere at all. The forest was gone, replaced by a hollow fog that clung to my skin. The pine scent lingered, sweet and metallic. The whispers were gone, but I could still feel them in the back of my mind, insistent, patient, waiting. I stumbled forward, limbs heavy, and realized I was alone. No Megan, no Kyle, only the faint path of pine needles, fresh and impossibly bright, pointing forward into the endless unknown. I didn't want to follow. I tried to turn back, but the forest, or whatever it was, had long since erased the way behind me. And I knew, with an icy certainty, that the path never ends. The fog clung to my skin, thick and wet, as though the forest had followed me into this empty gray void. I couldn't see the sun, the sky, or any horizon, just endless mist, interrupted only by the faint trail of pine needles that stretched endlessly forward. My limbs were heavy, every step an effort, as if the fog itself resisted my movement. I called out for Megan and Kyle. My voice cracked against the silence. Nothing answered. No laughter, no whisper, no familiar cadence. Only the persistent, faint crunch of the pine needles beneath my boots. It was hypnotic, unbearable in its monotony, and I felt my mind fraying under the strain. I stumbled into a narrow corridor of fog, the pine needle arrows sharper now, arranged in patterns too precise to be natural. Circles within circles, spirals, overlapping triangles. They glowed faintly, pulsing like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn, but my body moved forward of its own accord. Then the shadows returned. They weren't in the trees this time. They emerged from the fog itself. Pale, featureless forms, stretching impossibly, their limbs fluid, bending like smoke. One drifted near me, head tilted in that same unnatural curiosity. I tried to back away, but another formed behind me, then another in front. I was surrounded, suffocated by their presence. The whispers returned, sharper now, slicing through the silence. Follow, join, forever. Resist, join, follow, forever. I covered my ears screaming, but the sound of the forest or the voices penetrated everything. My knees buckled and I fell into the pine needle path. It wasn't soft dirt this time. It was firm, unnervingly solid, as if the forest had hardened beneath me to force me to obey. I crawled forward, breath ragged, heart hammering. That's when I saw them, or what they had become. Megan and Kyle, closer now, drifting along the path ahead. They weren't moving like humans. They glided, perfectly straight, heads tilted, eyes empty black pits. When they passed me, I caught a glimpse of something worse. Their mouths stretched impossibly wide, whispering in the language of the forest, forming words I could feel more than hear. Obey, join, follow, forever. I scrambled backward, but the path of needles had shifted again. No matter which way I turned, the arrows pointed forward. I realized with a deep, cold horror that there was no escape. The forest wasn't just around me, it was inside me. The whispers had burrowed into my thoughts, tugging at my fears, my memories, reshaping my perception. And then I saw it, a massive tree, or something masquerading as a tree, at the center of a widening clearing. Its trunk was impossibly wide, bark black and polished, twisted with faces frozen in silent screams. From its roots rose hundreds of pine needle arrows, each pointing at me, pulsing, moving as if alive. The air vibrated with intent. The shadow figure emerged from the fog, larger this time, limbs stretching higher than the twisted trees. Its faceless head tilted, examining me, judging me. The whispers coalesced into a single word, deep and resonant, vibrating through my chest. Yield. I shook my head violently. No, I screamed. I won't. But resistance was useless. The forest shifted beneath my feet. The path spiraled into impossible angles, wrapping around me like coils. The shadow figure reached toward me, and the pine needle arrows quivered, their glow intensifying. I felt my body moving against my will, compelled by the force of the forest, dragged forward into the clearing. I fell to my knees, gasping, clawing at the ground. The voices were inside my skull now, indistinguishable from my own thoughts. I saw visions in the fog. Megan and Kyle, their bodies twisting, stretching, becoming part of the forest itself, merging with the shadows and the needles. They were gone. Forever. The tree's roots shifted, reaching toward me, encircling, pressing, guiding me. One of the shadow figures leaned over, head tilting unnaturally close. Its presence burned into my mind. I understood in a terrifying instant that this forest didn't just consume, it rewrote. Any who entered became part of its memory, part of its will. It preserved them, but only as extensions of itself. Obedient, empty, eternal. I screamed, thrashing, but it was no use. The arrows pulsed, glowing brighter, forcing me forward. My hands scraped the living earth, the roots, but every escape path disappeared as soon as I looked away. I realized then that the forest had erased the way I came in. All exits were gone. And yet, deep inside, a small, stubborn part of me refused. I bit down on my panic, forcing breath into steady gasps. I had to survive. I couldn't be lost like Megan and Kyle. I couldn't let this forest own me. The shadow figure moved closer, and I saw the hollowed black eyes of Megan's face appear inside its form for a fraction of a second. Her voice, or the forest's imitation of it, echoed, "Join forever." I staggered, then collapsed backward into the fog. My eyes caught the path of pine needles ahead, pulsing. I did the only thing I could. I ran, screaming, moving blindly into the mist, following the arrows not out of obedience, but desperation and hope. The shadows pursued, drifting, sliding, silent, patient. The forest itself seemed to lean toward me, whispering, pulsing, alive with malevolence. Every step was agony, every breath a battle. And somewhere in the endless gray, I knew the final test awaited. I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. The forest had already claimed too much, and I was certain if I faltered, I would join Megan and Kyle. Another hollow, have another puppet for the needles. I had no choice but to keep following, deeper into the heart of the forest's impossible will. The fog thinned just enough for me to see the clearing ahead, or what passed for a clearing. It was massive, circular, and perfectly still. The ground beneath me covered in the thickest, freshest layer of pine needles I had ever seen. They glowed faintly, like embers in the half-light, and they pulsed with a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat, faster and faster, dragging me toward the center. I stumbled forward, breath ragged, eyes wide, and then I saw it, the tree. The enormous blackened trunk from before, impossibly vast, its bark twisted with frozen faces, countless mouths screaming silently. Roots snaked outward like fingers, curling toward the edges of the clearing, as if the tree itself were breathing, alive and waiting. The shadow figure emerged from the fog behind me again, larger, more menacing. Its limbs stretched impossibly, scraping against the air, and its faceless head tilted down toward me. I tried to run, but the arrows beneath my boots pulsed violently, forcing my steps forward. The forest's whispers were deafening now, inside my skull, outside, everywhere. Join, forever, follow, obey, join. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My limbs shook, my chest burned. And then I saw them, Megan and Kyle, hovering at the edge of the clearing, their bodies no longer human. Limbs elongated, faces twisted, eyes empty black pits. Their mouths opened impossibly wide, whispering the forest's commands, voices overlapping with the shadow figures. I realized then that this was it, the heart of the forest. Everything had led me here. The arrows, the whispers, the shifting paths, all were part of a single purpose. And that purpose was me. The shadow figure extended a limb or a branch toward me. I could feel it inside my mind, probing, testing, bending my will. Panic surged and instinct screamed for me to fight, but I was trapped. The tree's roots writhed beneath my feet, curling, gripping, guiding me closer. And then a thought pierced through the terror. I wasn't going to escape by obeying. I had to resist. I slammed my hands into the glowing pine needles beneath me. Their pulse flared violently under my touch, and the whispers surged to a screaming crescendo. The shadow recoiled, twisting in anger, limbs contorting unnaturally. Megan and Kyle's forms flickered, unstable now, faces flickering between themselves and the forest shadow. I forced myself to move, breaking the rhythm of the needles, stepping off the arrows for the first time. The forest screamed. Shadows lunged, but I kept moving, hopping from patch to patch of bare soil between the needles. I stumbled, fell, clawed my way forward, and for the first time, I saw something. The tree itself wasn't infinite. Its roots, though enormous, didn't cover the far side of the clearing. I ran. Every step was agony. The whispers tried to invade my mind, clawing at memories, twisting thoughts, but I forced them back, one step at a time, toward the gap. The shadow figures lunged and collided with invisible walls I forced into existence with sheer will, cracking like glass before shattering. I reached the far edge of the clearing, gasping, heart hammering, sweat and blood running down my face. The fog thinned even further. Beyond the clearing, I could see it, the normal forest. Sunlight filtering through green leaves, birds chirping, wind rustling through ordinary branches. Real trees, real air, real life. I didn't stop. I launched myself through the opening, past the last tendrils of shadow, past the writhing roots. My feet hit solid earth that didn't move, pine needles that didn't pulse. I ran blindly, crashing through branches, heart screaming in my ears. And then finally, I collapsed on the forest floor, gasping, hands clawing at dirt, shaking uncontrollably. I opened my eyes, expecting shadows, expecting whispers, but there was nothing. Only the forest I knew, calm, alive in a way that was real and forgiving. The path of pine needles was gone. The fog was gone. Megan and Kyle, they were gone. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling. The forest was silent except for the normal sounds of life, birds, insects, wind. I stumbled toward the nearest trailhead, toward civilization, tears streaming down my face. I didn't look back. I never saw Megan or Kyle again. Friends, hikers, human beings, they were gone, claimed by something I cannot explain. I don't know if the forest left them behind or if they became part of it, lost forever in the heart of the needles. All I know is that I survived. Somehow. But the memory lingers. The scent of pine, metallic and sweet, haunts my dreams. The whispers echo faintly in the corners of my mind. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the arrows forming again, pointing forward into a part of the world that shouldn't exist. Urging me, calling me. I don't know if I was lucky or cursed. I don't know if the forest will remember me, wait for me, or if it has already begun to follow me beyond its borders. I only know this: I will never take a trail into the unknown again. Some paths are meant to vanish, some forests are meant to claim, and some pine needles, well, they don't just fall. They wait. I thought I was safe. I thought that escaping the heart of the forest had been enough. I reached civilization, stumbled into a ranger station days later, delirious, dehydrated, trembling. They fed me, gave me blankets, and asked questions I couldn't answer. Every time I tried to speak of Megan and Kyle, of the forest, the arrows, the shadows, the whispers, I choked. Who would believe me? I stayed with the rangers for a night, and even in the safety of walls, I felt it. A faint, sweet scent of pine, metallic, clinging to the air. My skin itched as though something had embedded itself beneath it. And in the quiet hours before dawn, I could swear I heard soft whispers, faint, insistent, coming from the forest beyond the station. I tried to tell myself it was my mind, that the trauma had fractured reality, but the memory was too vivid. The angles of the forest, the spiraling arrows, Megan's black eyes, Kyle's distorted mouth, it wasn't imagination. It was real. Too real. Weeks passed. I returned home, but I couldn't sleep. The dreams came first, dense, suffocating forests where pine needles formed paths I had to follow. The whispers woke me at night, compelling me forward into shadows that twisted impossibly. I began noticing things in the real world, pine needles on my doorstep, fresh and fragrant, pointing inward. I would wake in the middle of the night and hear soft, distant crunching outside, though I lived alone. I tried to distract myself. Work, friends, errands. But the forest had left its mark. My mind was no longer entirely my own. I began seeing shapes in the corner of my eyes, elongated shadows gliding past walls, impossible angles of light and darkness that twisted unnaturally. The pine scent would rise in my nostrils, faint at first, then strong, overwhelming. And last week, I saw the first arrows. Not in the forest, not outside, but on the floor of my apartment. Tiny clusters of fresh pine needles forming the same spirals, the same sharp arrows, pointing to the bedroom door. My pulse went wild. I didn't move. I couldn't. I knew the forest wasn't finished. It never is. I could feel its presence lingering in every corner, every shadow in my dreams and waking thoughts. Megan and Kyle are gone, transformed, lost part of its will, and I am still me, barely. But the arrows are patient. The forest is patient. It waits. I can't stop thinking about them, about the whispers, the impossibly long limbs of the shadow figures, the spiraling path of pine needles. I try to convince myself that if I never leave my apartment, if I stay away from the woods, I'll be safe. But I know better. The forest doesn't obey rules. It doesn't rest. And I've learned that some paths, once entered, never truly vanish. Yesterday, I woke to a sound outside my window, soft, deliberate, like footsteps on dry leaves. I didn't look. I won't look. But when I glanced down, I saw the needles, fresh, impossibly bright, forming arrows that point not outward but inward, leading straight into me. And I know, deep in my chest, that one day soon the forest will come for me again. I don't know if I will run. I don't know if I can. Somewhere beyond every map, every path, every reality, the needles wait. And I am still on the path. Forever. The forest remembers. The forest waits. The forest follows, and the path never ends. The end. I don't know why I still try to make sense of what happened in those woods. Maybe because if I stop thinking about it, I'll have to face the possibility that the forest wasn't miscounting us at all. That I was. But I'll start at the beginning, before everything went wrong. The four of us arrived at the Beargate Trailhead a little after noon, all smelling like the inside of our cars and buzzing with the kind of excitement only adults pretending to be carefree can feel. It was early October, right when the aspens show off their gold and the sky looked like a sheet of polished steel. The kind of weather that makes the air sting your nose and lungs but feels good to move through. There was me, the one who always brings the first aid kit, Maya, who could probably navigate blindfolded, Jonah, who treated every hike like an excuse to test new gear, and Lila, our quiet photographer who spoke in gestures more than words. We planned a 4-day backpacking loop, starting with a 10-mile push to a ridge where an old fire lookout once stood. Nothing dramatic, just a chance to breathe, unplug, and feel small in a world that keeps demanding we be enormous. The trailhead was empty when we pulled in. No cars, no noise, just the flag flap of the National Forest sign and wind moving through the tall lodge poles. The silence settled around us like a blanket, not peaceful, expectant. We parked, stretched, shrugged on our packs. I remember thinking the place felt cleaner than other trailheads. No litter, no footprints in the soft dirt. Not even the usual carved initials in the boards of the wooden kiosk. It was Lila who tapped the glass of the visitor log. "Look," she said, her voice barely audible under the breeze. "They still use paper here." A runny ballpoint pen dangled from a chain, and the sign-in sheet sat beneath the plexiglass. Names, dates, group sizes. Nothing unusual. But I always signed the book, trail etiquette drilled into me by my dad, so I slid the case open and started writing. I wrote the date. I wrote my name. Then I wrote the total number in our group, 4. Then I added the others' names beneath mine, one by one. But as I wrote the last name, I frowned. Someone had already written it. Not mine, not Maya's, not Jonah's, not Lila's, but a 5th name, squeezed at the bottom of the blank line that should have been empty. I thought at first I'd smudged the page or misread the spacing. I blinked hard, tracing the line upward. No, it was real. A name. Written in shaky, cramped handwriting, slightly darker than my pen strokes, as if fresher. Evan. Just that. A first name, plain and unassuming. Maya leaned in. "Who's that?" "I don't know," I said. It was already. "No cars here," Jonah said. "Maybe someone got dropped off." But the dirt lot was barren. The access road narrowed for miles before hitting the nearest paved route. Anyone coming here would have needed a ride, sure, but even then they'd have left footprints, stray wrappers, something. Maybe they hiked in last night, Lila said quietly. That doesn't help, I muttered. There's no entry from the other side until the ridge, and that's a 20-mile haul. No one replied. I felt suddenly aware of the woods behind us, the dense, towering green pressing close, the kind of forest that swallows sound, a place where you can't shake the feeling of something watching from behind the trees. But I'm the practical one, so I pushed away the unease. It doesn't matter, I said. Let's get moving before the weather turns. We hit the trail. The woods were beautiful in that vast, indifferent way nature has, the kind of beauty that doesn't care whether you're there to witness it. Golden leaves drifting, pine needles brushing your arms, the distant croak of ravens. With each step, I tried to let the edge of that strange moment at the kiosk fade. The trail cut through the forest in a slow, steady rise. After a couple miles, the sound of the road was gone, swallowed by the deeper hush of the wild. At first, everything felt normal. We fell into our usual rhythm, Maya leading, Jonah stopping to fuss with his trekking poles, Lila taking photos of fungi and rocks, and me watching the sky through the trees. But the further we walked, the more the quiet thickened. Birds were scarce. No chipmunks darting across logs, not even the usual smell of damp earth. It was clean and dry and strangely empty. Around mile 4, Maya slowed down. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked. We all stopped. I listened at first. I heard nothing. Then I realized what she meant. There was no wind. The branches above stood perfectly still. The aspens, usually restless, trembling, were motionless. I felt a prickle crawl up my neck. Probably just one of those weird pockets where sound drops off, Jonah said, though he didn't sound convinced. We walked on. But every so often the silence deepened, like the woods were holding their breath. We reached a small clearing an hour later, a patch of sunlight breaking through the canopy. We tossed our packs down to rest. Lila wandered to the edge of the clearing to take photos. This was one of her rituals, a way to learn the forest, she said. That's when she froze. "Guys," she called, "come here." We came running. She pointed at the ground, a patch of soft soil beneath a deadfall. Footprints, fresh ones, heel to toe, normal boots, maybe size 10 or 11. Not ours. The tread didn't match any of our hiking boots. "Heads north," Jonah said, crouching to trace the toes. Except the tracks weren't heading anywhere. They went forward a couple of steps, then stopped. No returning tracks, no trail onward, just ended, as if the walker had vanished mid-stride. Maya looked at me. "You think these belong to the fifth name?" I didn't want to admit it, but it was the first thought in my mind. "Could be," I said. "Where'd he go?" she whispered. Before I could answer, a sharp crack echoed from deeper in the trees, like a branch snapping under heavy weight. We all whipped our heads toward the sound, but nothing moved. No footsteps followed, no rustling, just the same breathless stillness. After several long seconds, Jonah exhaled shakily. "Probably a dead branch falling." He forced a laugh. "Guys, it's the woods. Things fall." But I noticed he'd tightened his grip on the trekking poles. For the rest of the afternoon, the forest felt heavier, thicker, like a quilt draped over our senses. We tried to talk, to lighten the mood, but our conversations fizzled. Each of us walked faster than usual, as if something behind us was quietly urging us forward. We reached the old fire road that led to our campsite a little before dusk. The sky had turned a dusty pink, and the mountains ahead were fading into silhouettes. We picked a spot near a cluster of big granite boulders, pitched our tents, and gathered kindling for a fire. For a while, it almost felt normal again. The air grew colder, and we huddled close to the flickering warmth. Maya heated up a pot of chili, the steam rising into the crisp evening. Jonah passed around his titanium mugs. Lila snapped a few candid shots of us, catching our half-smiles and tired faces. The forest around us darkened into a wall of shadows. Then something odd happened. When Lila reviewed her photos, she frowned. "What's wrong?" Maya asked. She hesitated. "Look." She handed me the camera. There were 5 figures around the campfire, 5 silhouettes, 5 shapes lit orange by firelight. Except only 4 of us were there when the photo was taken. Is one of us leaning weird? Overlapping? Jonah asked, peering over my shoulder. No, I said. My mouth was dry. These are all spread apart. There's a 5th shape. It could be a trick of the light, Maya offered weakly. But Lila shook her head. I take photos for a living. This isn't light distortion. We fell silent again. The fire crackled. A night bird screeched far off, then fell silent. The air grew colder. I deleted the picture, not because I wanted to, but because something in me recoiled at the idea of keeping it, like saving that photo would acknowledge something I wasn't ready to confront. We tried to brush it off as fatigue. We ate, we talked quietly, and we pretended we weren't rattled. But the night felt wrong. The darkness pressed too close. Every few minutes, one of us would turn a little too quickly, scanning the tree line. A little after 10, the fire burned low. The stars were sharp pinpricks above us. We were settling into our tents when we heard it. A footstep. Clear, deliberate. In the leaves behind the boulders, we all froze. Another step, crunch. Then another, slow, measured, as if someone was circling the camp. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. The footsteps paused, then continued, moving around to the opposite side of camp. Maya grabbed her flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Nothing, but the steps kept going. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Always just outside the edge of the light. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. "Is someone pranking us?" Jonah whispered harshly. "There's no one else out here," I said. The footsteps halted. The silence that followed was so deep it felt like the forest was listening. Then something exhaled. Not close, but not far either. A soft, slow release of breath. Human. I could tell. We stood shoulder to shoulder, flashlights trembling, waiting for the shape behind the boulders to step into view. It never did. We didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard phantom crunches in the leaves. The cold seeped into my bones. I lay awake staring at the nylon ceiling of my tent, trying not to imagine a stranger standing inches away. Morning came pale and brittle, and when we gathered around the fire pit, bleary and exhausted, Maya was already staring at the visitor log she'd photographed earlier on her phone. "You guys need to see this." The photo was clear. The names were all there. Mine, hers, Jonah's, Lila's, and at the bottom, Evan. Group of 5. We had never written the group size for him, nor had we written 5 anywhere. My stomach tightened. The forest hadn't miscounted us. Someone had signed in with us. "Guys," Maya whispered, voice trembling. "Someone thinks they're part of our group." And in that moment, with the sun rising weakly through the trees and the smell of cold ashes in the air, I realized something else. Last night, there had been 5 sets of footsteps. One of them didn't belong to us. Morning light didn't bring relief. It only revealed how gray and hollow our faces looked from the night before. No one spoke for a long time. We just sat there in the chill, nursing instant coffee and staring toward the tree line as if waiting for someone to step out. I kept replaying the sound of those footsteps circling us, the way they stopped, the way something breathed, human and deliberate, just beyond the boulders. We were 4 people. But at least 5 footsteps had moved around the camp. "We shouldn't make big decisions while we're freaked out," Jonah said eventually, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We just need to be logical." Normally, he was the calm one, the gearhead, the problem solver, but he looked shaken. His voice wavered under the surface. "Logical?" Maya snapped quietly. "What's logical about someone joining our group without our knowledge? Or circling us in the dark?" "Maybe they needed help," he said. "Then why hide?" she asked. "Why not walk up to the fire? Why not speak?" She wasn't emotional. She wasn't yelling. She sounded tired, like something fundamental had shifted inside her. Lila didn't say a word. She just hugged her arms around herself, camera strap dangling from her neck. I tried to ground myself. I went through our gear, checking for anything out of place, nothing missing, nothing disturbed, which somehow made things worse. It felt intentional, whatever had been out there. As I zipped my pack, something caught my eye, footprints in the soft loam behind the tents, a faint trail. I crouched, boot prints, heading away from camp. Same tread pattern we'd seen by the clearing yesterday. Over here, I said. Everyone scrambled over. The tracks moved in a straight line toward a dense wall of pines. No return prints, no drag marks, no sign of hesitation. They were here, Maya whispered. Whoever it was walked right up behind our tents, I said, then left. Or watched, Lila murmured. We followed the prints for maybe 20 feet until they abruptly stopped. Again, just like yesterday. The final footprint was a perfect impression, heel deep, toe angled forward, and then nothing. No more soil, no scuffed needles, no broken twigs. The footsteps ended in a patch of unmarked forest floor. How does someone just... Jonah swallowed hard. Vanish? Twice? They can't, Maya said. They literally can't. And she was right. But the evidence sat in front of us, dark and unmistakable. The woods around us creaked gently in a small morning breeze. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. The air felt wrong, like the forest was holding something in its lungs. We debated going back. The trailhead was only half a day behind us, but the idea of walking backward toward the place where someone had written their name with ours, as though they had always intended to join, made us collectively pause. I don't want to pass that kiosk again, Lila said, barely audible. Not until we know what's going on. Forward, then? Jonah asked. I didn't like it, but something in me resisted the idea of retracing our steps, as if the forest behind us had already closed up. The thought made my skin tighten. Maya pulled out the map. The ridge is 7 miles from here, she said. It's open ground, views in every direction, easier to spot people. And harder for someone to sneak up, I added. It felt like the first reasonable thought we'd had all morning. We packed up quickly. I kept catching myself scanning the woods, searching for movement or the glint of someone watching. Nothing. But once, when we were about to leave, I heard a faint thump, like a footstep behind a dead tree. When I turned, no one was there. I didn't tell anyone. We set out. The forest tightened around us almost immediately. Dense pine on both sides, branches needling overhead to form a dark tunnel. The smell of sap thickened. The temperature dropped noticeably, like we'd stepped into a refrigerator. The first mile was quiet, too quiet. We kept glancing behind us, expecting someone to fall into step. I found myself listening obsessively for a fifth set of footfalls. All I heard was our synchronized crunching. But at the 2nd mile marker, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A glove, a single black glove sitting in the middle of the trail. Not ours. None of us wore gloves like that. Lila knelt carefully. Do you think someone dropped it? I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the way it lay, palm down, fingers pointing toward us, like it had been placed, not dropped. Maya leaned closer and sucked in a breath. What? Jonah asked. She pointed. Look at the fingertips. The glove's leather was crushed inward slightly, dusted with pine pollen, but the fingertips were worn, not like they'd been scuffed on rocks, but flattened from pressure, as if the wearer spent long stretches pressing their fingers into the ground. Why would someone crawl? Jonah murmured. No one answered. I stepped back. The forest felt colder. Let's go, Maya said. We're not standing around this thing. We kept moving, and none of us touched the glove. But for the next hour, every time I blinked, I pictured fingers pushing into soil. Inch by inch, quiet, slow watching. The trail eventually opened into a wetland area. Low shrubs, flattened grass from elk, pools of mud reflecting the sky like pieces of broken mirror. And in the mud, we saw it again. Footprints, but not wandering, not random. A set of human tracks pacing back and forth near the waterline. Long strides, deep impressions, like someone had stood there for hours, watching the trail, waiting. Is it the same tread? I asked. Jonah crouched, comparing with his phone's picture of the earlier tracks. Yeah, he said softly, exact same pattern. The tracks were fresher too, edges sharp, mud still glistening, hours old at most. Then Lila's breath hitched. I think they were following us. She pointed behind us to another set of prints that trailed along the wet earth parallel to our path, as if someone had been walking silently through the brush, keeping pace. My stomach turned. "How did we not hear them?" I whispered. Maya's face was pale. "Let's move. Now." We skirted the wetland fast, stumbling over roots, slipping on damp reeds. I kept feeling the back of my neck tighten, as though eyes were tracing the curves of our bodies. The wind picked up, whistling through the cattails like someone whispering hurriedly. When we reached the other side, Maya stopped abruptly. "Look," she said. Ahead of us, the trail split into two forks. North continued to the ridge, east cut toward a lake 3 miles off. But carved into the dirt at the fork was a giant footprint, like someone had deliberately stomped twice to leave a deep impression. And next to it, drawn with the tip of a stick, was a simple line of text. 5, pointing toward the ridge. Lila staggered backward, eyes wide. No. They know where we're going, Jonah breathed. Or they want us to go there, I whispered. Maya folded the map with trembling hands. We have to keep going. The ridge is safer than backtrack. Her voice cut off, because somewhere behind us, maybe 50 yards back, a branch snapped sharply. Not a twig. A branch. Like someone heavy had stepped wrong. We froze. Then another snap. Closer. The forest dimmed around us as if a cloud passed over the sun. Go, I whispered. Don't look back. And we moved, fast, steady, trying not to break into a full panic sprint. The trees thinned, the trail widened, sun began filtering through in warmer patches, but none of it helped, because every few seconds I heard it. Crunch, pause, crunch. Not loud, not rushing, just following, keeping pace. We reached a long granite outcropping where the trail bent. Maya held up a hand. Stop. What? Jonah hissed. She pointed at the dirt. Our footprints stretched behind us, but overlaying them, barely there, faint but undeniable, was a single print, right in the center of mine. As if someone had stepped directly where I stepped seconds after I passed through. Lila started to cry silently. Let's get to open ground, Maya said, her voice cracking. We need light. Views. So we pushed on, going as fast as we could without losing control. By noon, we reached a steep ascent leading toward the ridge. The slope was exposed, the woods thinning into low brush. The sun was higher here, the sky wide. I actually breathed easier for a moment. But halfway up the incline, Maya spoke in a trembling whisper. Do you guys hear that? We stopped. Wind, our breathing, the scrape of loose rock, then footsteps, but not behind us anymore, above us. Someone was walking steadily on the ridge overhead, their silhouette shielded by the angle. The sound was unmistakable, the solid thud of a boot on stone, one step, another. Slow, patient, intentional. My mouth went dry. Are they waiting for us up there? Jonah whispered. No, I said, staring upward. They're counting. I don't know why I said that. It just came out, a quiet truth that rose from my chest without permission. The footsteps overhead stopped. Silence expanded across the slope. We stayed frozen for a full minute, not daring to breathe. Then the footsteps resumed, back and forth, like someone pacing above a grave. Keep moving, Maya whispered. Don't stop. Don't run. Just don't give them a reason. But she didn't finish her sentence, because she didn't know what reason they needed. None of us did. We climbed. The pacing continued overhead, always matching our rhythm. When we slowed, the steps slowed. When we sped up, they quickened slightly, keeping the same distance, matching us, mirroring us, counting us. I felt the hair on my arms lift with static. When we reached the top, I expected desperately to see someone, anyone, a real physical human being we could confront, question, understand, something that made sense. Instead, the summit was empty. No footprints, no figure, nothing. Just a vast open ridge with wind cutting across it, carrying the smell of distant frost. But somehow, the pacing still echoed. Not from the ground, from the trees behind us, from the rocks to our right, from the hollow beneath an old stump, tracking us from multiple directions at once, like the forest itself was moving. I want to leave, Lila said, her voice tiny. I don't care where. I just want to leave. We can't go back, Maya said shakily. We're already halfway. The shortcut trail to the Western Valley is only a mile ahead. It'll take us to a ranger outpost. That's our best shot, I agreed, though dread pulled at my stomach. We walked. The ridge should have felt safer. It didn't. The forest pressed in from both sides, crowding the trail like it wanted to swallow it again. To swallow us. Halfway to the junction, we saw something impossible. A cairn of stones, deliberately stacked, sitting in the middle of the trail. And atop it, balanced perfectly, was the glove from earlier. Only now the fingertips were wet. With mud. Or something darker. Lila gagged. Maya stepped forward cautiously, then froze. Because beside the cairn, written in the dirt with a fingertip, were 2 words, "Not for." I stared longer than I should have, unable to breathe. The line of text dipped slightly at the end, as though whoever wrote it had trembled in excitement, or hunger. Jonah backed away slowly. "We're being hunted." No one disagreed. Suddenly the wind shifted, carrying a sound from the trees to our right. A breath. Close, then a whisper, too soft to make out, but shaped just like a word, or a number. We ran. Not a full sprint. We knew better than to break an ankle on the ridge, but fast enough to choke on our own breaths. Fast enough to feel like prey. The shortcut junction appeared around a cluster of pines, marked by an old wooden sign with faded lettering. But what stopped us cold was what sat directly beneath it. A line of footprints. Fresh. Crisp. Leading down the shortcut trail, exactly 5 sets. 1 deeper and farther apart. A fast, confident stride. 4 lighter. Our own. I shook violently. We never took this trail," Maya whispered. "He's tracking where we're going before we move," Jonah said. How is that possible?" Lila stepped back, tears streaking her cheeks. "This place is wrong." My skin crawled, my throat felt tight. Something in the woods shuddered, a ripple of movement we couldn't see. And then, behind us, something stepped onto the ridge stones with a sound like bone hitting granite. A single heavy footfall, then another, closer, and then a third. Slow, deliberate, determined. I didn't turn around. None of us did, because whatever stood on that ridge behind us wasn't breathing. "Go," Maya whispered, voice trembling. "Down the shortcut, now." And so we went. Not because it felt safe, but because everything behind us felt infinitely worse. As we descended into darker, thicker forest, branches closing overhead like fingers interlocking, I couldn't stop thinking about the message scratched into the dirt. Not for. The forest hadn't counted wrong. Something else had. Something that moved silently. That watched us sleep. That walked where we walked seconds after we passed. That paced above us, learning us, studying us, following us, because somewhere in those trees, something believed we weren't 4 hikers. We were 5, and they were waiting for the moment we finally realized who the extra one was. The shortcut trail dropped steeply into a darker part of the forest, a place where even the wind seemed reluctant to follow. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space of a few steps. We felt it immediately, the cold sliding along our skin like a wet hand. Tall pines crowded closer here. Their trunks were blackened by age or fire, and the spaces between them narrowed into shadowy corridors. Light filtered down in thin, pale ribbons. Dust particles drifted slowly, as if suspended in thick water. It felt like entering a different forest entirely. We moved quickly, trying not to make our fear obvious to each other, but we all felt it. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became, pressing down on our shoulders and lungs. My pack straps dug in. Sweat chilled beneath my jacket. Behind us, the ridge was silent, too silent. No wind, no birds, no footsteps, no breathing, nothing. That silence felt worse than the footsteps ever did. As if the thing following us no longer needed to follow, as if it had already gotten ahead. About a quarter mile down, the trail split again, only this time it wasn't on the map. "What the hell?" Jonah said, stopping so abruptly I nearly collided with him. The fork branched into 3 narrow paths, each disappearing into dense undergrowth. The wooden post marker, old and tilted, had 3 arrows carved into it. No words, no painted symbols, just crude knife marks. Someone or something had carved those arrows by hand. Maya unfolded the map again, her fingers shaking. "This isn't right. This shortcut trail is supposed to be straight, no branches. What if they made new ones?" Jonah asked. "No. That wouldn't just appear without updated markers or maintenance. And these," Maya pointed at the carved arrows, These aren't official. Someone hacked these in. Which one do we take? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all stared at the three paths. Left, narrow, choked with brush, barely visible. Middle, wider, descending steeply into a ravine. Right, twisting, uneven, disappearing between two massive pines like a throat. Left looks least used, Jonah said. Could be safer. That's exactly why I don't like it, I said. Too easy to get lost. What about the right? Maya asked. No, Lila whispered, backing away from it. There's something wrong with that one. I agreed. The air near the right trail felt still, stale, as if no wind had touched it in years. And between the two pines, I thought, just for a heartbeat, I saw a shadow shift. But no one had stepped there. No one but us. Middle, I said. It's the clearest. If we have to backtrack, we'll know. We agreed. We stepped onto the middle trail, and immediately I regretted it. The ravine was steep. Loose shale slid under our boots. Roots jutted like ribs from the slanted ground. We had to move carefully to avoid tumbling. The trees narrowed overhead, stringing the light into thin, warped strands. Every few seconds, something cracked behind us. Not close, but not far. Not footsteps. Something heavier. A shifting weight, like wood bending under pressure. Don't look back, Maya repeated, almost chanting. Don't look back. But curiosity is a cruel thing. After the fourth crack, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The trail behind us was empty, and yet as I stared, a pine trunk in the distance shifted to the side, just slightly, like something had moved behind it, then leaned into place again. I whipped my head forward. My stomach dropped. The ravine grew darker, the air colder. Did you see something? Lila whispered. I don't know, I said. I don't know what I saw. We kept moving. Another 10 minutes passed, and that's when we noticed it. The forest had gone silent again. Silence had become its own language to us, its own threat. Every time it descended, something followed. This is wrong, Jonah said. This doesn't feel like the same forest anymore. And he was right. The trees looked different. Too tall, too straight, too uniform. Their bark seemed smoother than before, almost polished. And the spaces between them seemed stretched, like someone had pulled the forest sideways, or like the forest was expanding as we walked. What are the odds, Maya said under her breath, that we've walked 2 miles and haven't seen a single bird? Lila swallowed. Maybe it's migration season? No, Maya shook her head. There should still be noise, rodents, bugs, something. There was nothing. My pulse hammered in my ears. We walked faster. The ravine narrowed until the trail was barely 3 feet across, with a drop-off on one side, a slope of tangled roots and dead leaves descending into a darker hollow. We kept to the inner edge. That's when we noticed the footprints on the slope below. A line of single, perfectly spaced footprints cutting horizontally across the steep hillside, impossibly straight, as if someone walked sideways across the incline without slipping. But the spacing, they were long strides. Too long. Then I saw something worse. Each footprint pointed toward the trail, toward us. Keep moving, Maya said, her voice tight. But as we tried to pass, Jonah froze and pointed. At the next footprint, there was a second set overlapping it, smaller, lighter. A perfect match for Maya's, except she hadn't stepped there. The prints were following our order, recreating our pattern, as if something walked where we walked, only seconds after we did. You okay? I asked Jonah quietly. He nodded, but briefly. I don't think it's just one person following us. What do you mean? He pointed again. Some footprints were heavier, deeper, some lighter, some faint. Too many variations, too many shapes. More than one pair of feet had walked here. I swallowed hard. Let's keep going, I whispered. But as soon as we started moving, a sound drifted up the ravine, a slow, dragging inhale. Not near, not far. Everywhere at once. Lila whimpered. We need to run. We did. The ravine twisted sharply and the slope became more treacherous. Every footstep sent pebbles skittering down the incline. Branches clawed at our jackets. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. And behind us, soft footsteps, but not frantic, measured, like something enjoyed the chase. Don't look, Maya yelled as Jonah turned his head. I have to see how close it... He slipped. His right boot skidded on loose shale. He pitched sideways, arms flailing. Before I could reach him, he slid down the slope, crashing through underbrush and disappearing beneath the tangled mass of roots. "Jonah!" we screamed in unison. The footsteps behind us stopped. A silence opened. Then a sound rose from below. Not Jonah. Something else. A low, rhythmic thump like a hand tapping wood, or a foot hitting earth, over and over, in a slow, deliberate pattern. Thump, thump, thump. "Jonah?" Maya called, her voice cracking. No answer. Thump, thump. The tapping grew faster, more urgent. I dropped my pack and scrambled to the edge, gripping a tree trunk for balance as I peered down. I saw movement. Something tall, too tall, shifting in the shadows below. Its shape was wrong. Long-limbed, bent at unnatural angles, like joints where joints shouldn't be. Its hands, if they were hands, pressed slowly against the tree trunks around it, pushing them aside, looking for a way up, toward us. My throat locked. "Back!" I gasped. "Back! Up the trail!" "What about Jonah?" Lila cried. I don't think that was..." A scream cut through the ravine, Jonah's voice, raw, terrified, ripping through the silence like something tearing. "Help me!" We froze. The scream came again, distorted, too loud, echoing wrong. "Help me!" That wasn't fear in the second scream, it was mimicry. Something was repeating him, using his voice. Lila covered her ears and sobbed. Maya looked like she might collapse. "We can't go down there," I whispered. "Whatever that is, whatever's using his voice, it's waiting." "We have to move," Maya said, grabbing Lila's arm. "Now! Now!" We ran. The ravine narrowed, then widened into a cluster of downed trees. We leapt over trunks, ducked branches, stumbled through dense ferns. The forest around us changed again, now darker, thicker, the canopy strangling out the sky, but the footsteps returned, now closer, more numerous, multiplying. Not one, not two, but dozens. Some slow, some fast, some crawling, some running, all staying just out of sight, always just behind the next tree. The air trembled with them. Maya spun, gasping. It's not a person, oh my God, there was never just one person. I didn't want to understand, but I did. The forest wasn't counting an extra hiker, it was counting additions. More than one, more every hour. Something was growing inside these woods, something that learned our strides, our spacing, our sounds, our voices, something that filled in our missing pieces until there were too many to track, too many to hear, too many to run from. "Keep going," I shouted, pushing Maya and Lila forward. Branches whipped our faces, roots grabbed our ankles. We stumbled, gasping, crying, running blindly, until at last, a break in the trees, a valley opening below, a meadow stretching out, pale and windswept. We spilled out into the grass and collapsed, sucking down cold air. Behind us, the forest edge loomed like a wall, silent, still, watching. Lila sobbed violently. Maya sat trembling, hands over her mouth. "We lost Jonah," she whispered, but before I could say anything, a shape stepped out of the trees, tall, still, almost human. It stood at the edge of the meadow, half hidden in shadow. Then another stepped beside it, and another, a third, a fourth. Shapes that moved just slightly too slow, stood just slightly too straight, shifted with the wrong kind of curiosity. And then, between them, a fifth shape, our missing hiker, Jonah, or what wore his silhouette, his head tilted, his arms hung unnaturally long, his chest expanded and deflated in slow, uneven breaths. Then he stepped forward. "No," Maya whispered. No, Jonah?" The shape opened its mouth and spoke in his voice, but wrong. "Help me," and then in perfect mimicry, "You're not four." The forest behind him whispered the same phrase in overlapping voices. Not four. Not four. Not four. Not. I grabbed Maya and Lila by the arms. We run now. And as we turned toward the valley trail, the shapes stepped forward in unison, as though they had been waiting for that exact moment, the moment the count finally changed. We ran. Not because we thought we could outrun them, whatever those things were, but because instinct demanded it. Fear took over. The valley trail cut through tall, frost-tipped grass, the stalks slapping our legs like frantic hands trying to stop us from making the wrong choice. Behind us, the shapes moved with that same slow, unnatural coordination. They didn't sprint. They didn't even hurry. They just followed, steady, predictable, like they didn't need to rush, like they knew we'd tire long before they would. Maya grabbed my arm as we ran. "There has to be an outpost ahead. Keep going toward the river. We'll never make it if we stay exposed, Lila sobbed. We don't have a choice. We tore across the meadow until the grass swallowed the sound of our footfalls. Our breaths puffed white in the cold air. The temperature dropped sharply as we neared the tree line at the other end of the valley, different from the forest behind us. The trees here were sparse, shorter, less oppressive. Hope tugged at my chest, one desperate thread of it. Then a sound cut across the field, not from behind, from ahead. Crunch, a footstep. We froze mid-stride. Another footstep, but slower, more deliberate. We stared toward the tree line. A figure stepped into view, a person, human height, human build, wearing a backpack. For half a second, relief surged through me so violently it hurt. Hey, Maya shouted, waving her arms. Hey, help! The figure stopped, turned, tilted its head slightly as if listening. Then it stepped forward. The way it moved, my chest snapped tight. Too smooth, too calm, too synchronized with the shapes behind us. Maya, I whispered, grabbing her arm before she could run toward it. That's not... The figure raised a hand in greeting, but its fingers were wrong. Too long, too evenly spaced, as if copied from a drawing of a hand rather than the real thing. The person's shape began walking toward us across the meadow, not fast, just closing the distance with a quiet, patient certainty. We go back, Lila cried. No, I said, scanning wildly. They're behind us. We can cut east, Maya said. There's a drainage gully. There should be a dry stream bed. An idea clicked in my mind. Rivers, I whispered. Rivers mean rangers. We turned east and ran, grass whipping our shins, breath tearing our lungs. The shapes didn't shout, didn't chase loudly. They simply angled their bodies, adjusting their path, matching ours, collecting us, counting us. Not four. Never four. The ground dipped sharply downward. Our boots slid in loose soil. The drainage gully opened beneath us like a scar, 10 feet deep, walls cut by old floods. Pebbles skittered, branches snapped underfoot. We scrambled down the sloping bank, half falling, half climbing. Dirt packed under my nails, the smell of cold mud filled my nose. My knees burned as I hit the dry stream bed bottom. Maya landed hard beside me. Lila stumbled, and I caught her weight before she collapsed. We had seconds, maybe less, but the gully was narrow, twisting deeper into the valley like a natural hallway. Go! Maya gasped. The river should link ahead. We stumbled forward through the channel. Above us, at the rim of the gully, shadows began to gather. Shapes peered down, not reaching, not rushing, just observing. Dark outlines against the pale sky, silent, counting. Lila whimpered. Why aren't they coming down? Maybe they don't want to collapse the earth, Maya muttered. No, I said, feeling the slow creeping truth wash over me. They don't want to change the path. What path? The path they walked. I pointed ahead. Footprints lined the stream bed. Our footprints. Except we hadn't been here yet. I froze, stomach turning. The prints were fresh, sharp-edged, leading forward, in a sequence that matched our order exactly. Mine, Maya's, Lila's. 3, not 4. My throat tightened. They're predicting us, Maya whispered. They're laying the trail before we walk it. Lila shook her head violently. No, they can't know where she stopped. Because ahead, around the bend, a fourth set of prints appeared. Fresh, crisp, exactly her size. Maya, she choked. You didn't walk there, Maya said, voice barely a breath. They're putting us where they want, I whispered. Not following us, placing us. And then we saw the fifth set, larger, wider, matching the strange, deep boot prints from earlier. The fifth walker, the one who had signed into the trailhead with us, the one who paced above us on the ridge, the one who mimicked Jonah's voice. It had walked this exact path, leading us forward, inviting us. Keep going, Maya whispered hoarsely. We don't stop, we don't think, we don't look back. But Lila did. She turned her head just enough, just a glance, and she froze. Her eyes went wide, pupils shrinking to pinpoints, her breath hitched. Lila? I whispered. She couldn't speak. Her lips trembled, her gaze fixed on something above the gully rim behind me. I turned. Slowly, too slowly. A shape stood above us. Human silhouette, elongated, arms too long, head tilted, neck just slightly too flexible, and it was smiling. A long, unnatural stretch of lips that didn't belong on a human face. It lifted one hand, not to reach for us, to wave, to acknowledge us, the same gesture the figure in the meadow had used. Copying, practicing, perfecting. Go, Maya screamed. We sprinted. The gully twisted sharply, and the world suddenly changed around the bend. Sound returned. The roar of water, the river. Cold air blasted against our faces. The stream bed sloped upward, and we climbed desperately until we burst out of the gully onto a wide gravel bank. The river churned in front of us. Wide, fast, icy, snowmelt fed. A ranger flag marker stood 50 yards downstream, nailed to a birch tree. Relief collapsed through me. Come on, I gasped. The outpost has to be nearby. We ran along the gravel, but something was wrong. The river didn't sound right. It roared, but not naturally. Under the water, beneath the rush, there was a cadence, a rhythm. Thump, 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 like the tapping we'd heard near Jonah. Then, a voice rose beneath it. Faint, distorted, gargling, help me. Jonah, or the thing wearing Jonah. It was in the water, or beneath the water, or the water was carrying it. We stay away from the river, I shouted, but it was too late. Lila staggered. Her boots slipped on smooth gravel. She stumbled toward the water's edge. I grabbed her arm, but a shadow surged beneath the current, fast as a fish, huge and long. I saw a face in the refracted surface. Jonah's face, or something wearing it like a mask. Its eyes were too wide, its smile too still, its skin too smooth. It rose toward the surface, and I yanked Lila back just as a pale hand broke the waterline, fingers splayed too far apart. Maya screamed. We ran upstream, stumbling over stones as icy mist chilled our skin. The ranger flag disappeared behind us, swallowed by bending branches. Shapes began stepping from the woods along the opposite bank. Dozens. Tall. Thin. Walking in perfect synchronization. Each movement mirrored. Each step measured. Like a choir of bodies trained to stalk prey. One lifted its hand and pointed at us, not accusing, just confirming the count. Keep going, Maya shouted. Upstream! Upstream! We followed the waterway until the forest grew dense again. The river narrowed into thick rapids, white foam surging over black rock. Fallen trees straddled the banks, creating dark tunnels. A bridge, Lila gasped. There has to be a bridge. Then, as if summoned by her desperation, a shape appeared in the trees ahead. A cabin. Old, weather-beaten, but real. A ranger's emergency shelter. Maya nearly sobbed with relief. Go! Go! We burst through the clearing. The cabin's single window was fogged. The door hung slightly open, a faded Forest Service emblem peeled off the wood. But as we reached the steps, the door creaked wider. Not from the wind, from inside. Something had pushed it open, something waiting, something aware. We skidded to a stop. Silence fell around us, thick, total, smothering. Then we heard it. Footsteps inside the cabin. Soft, even, mirroring our breaths. Then a voice. Not Jonah's, not mine, not anyone living. 4, 4, 4, 4, repeating, searching, correcting, until finally the voice grew louder, clearer, more confident. Not 4. Maya grabbed my hand. We can't go in. No kidding, I whispered. But then behind us, branches snapped, grass shifted, shapes stepped into the clearing, not close yet, but closing. The forest had followed, the river had followed, the gully had followed, light. Now the cabin was following too. Which way? Lila sobbed. Which way? I spun desperately, scanning the clearing, and then my heart stopped, because behind the cabin, barely visible between the trees, a fifth figure stood perfectly still, not moving, not breathing, just waiting. Like it knew we'd look for a way out, like it had been placed there. Placed to fill the missing space, placed to even the count, placed to be the extra one. We stood frozen in the clearing, the cabin yawning open before us, the forest crowding in from behind, and that fifth figure, too still, too patient, waiting just beyond the back wall of the shelter. None of us moved, none of us breathed, because in that moment we finally understood the truth we had been running from. The forest hadn't miscounted our group. It had chosen a number, 5, and it intended to make that number correct, by any means. Maya squeezed my wrist hard enough to bruise. We can't go to the cabin. That thing inside, it's predicting us. Before I could respond, something shifted behind the cabin. A long, slow tilt of a head, a ripple of shadow, a rearranging of limbs, not human limbs. It knew we saw it, and it didn't care. The shapes behind us, the ones that had followed us across the meadow, stepped closer. Branches snapped under their deliberate footfalls, still slow, still patient, but moving in, closer and closer. "We're boxed in," Lila sobbed. "We're trapped." "No," Maya said through clenched teeth. "There's a way out. There has to be." But the forest didn't believe in doors. It believed in patterns, and it had already decided our path. I scanned the clearing desperately. The terrain sloped on both sides, too steep, too overgrown. The river churned below the ridge 100 yards off, white, violent, impossible to cross. The cabin's shadow stretched long and black behind its door, creaking slowly in the cold wind. "We can't go inside," I whispered. "It wants us inside. That's why it opened the door." Lila clutched my arm. "It's hurting us." Maya inhaled sharply at the word. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." A twig snapped behind us. A soft exhale answered it. Then a second voice layered over the first. Same sound, same breath. Then a third. I couldn't turn around. I knew what was there. A growing cluster of copies, of mistaken identities, of stolen silhouettes. And then something spoke from inside the cabin. Closer now, clearer now. 4, not 4. Wrong. Maya shook her head violently. "What do we do? What do we do?" The forest fell silent again. Everything leaned inward. Everything watched. And then, without warning, a scream tore through the woods. A man's scream. Jonah's scream. Raw, shredded, full of pain. "Help! Please help me!" Lila flinched so hard she almost fell. "He's alive!" "No," I said, grabbing her. Lila, listen to me. That's not him. It sounds like him." "Yes, but it sounded like him back at the ravine too. It learned him. It's using his voice." The scream came again. "Please don't leave me. Help." Then it broke into choked sobbing. The exact pitch Jonah had when he got his foot crushed on a climb 2 summers ago. It was perfect. Too perfect. It wasn't a cry for help. It was bait. A lure. And the forest waited to see which one of us would follow it, which one would break the count, which one it could separate, because if we split up, if any of us ran toward that voice, the number would change again, and the forest would correct it. All at once I understood. "They're not chasing us," I said, my voice hoarse. "They're guiding us. They don't want to grab us one by one." "Why?" Maya whispered. "Because they want 5, and if they take someone now before we're together, they'd have to replace that person with something else." Lila whimpered. "Why does it matter? Why does the number matter?" "Because the forest counts," I whispered. "It counts everything that enters, everything that leaves. It keeps the balance. And something broke the balance. Something joined our group before we arrived. Something that wasn't human." Maya's face went pale. "And now it wants the real group to match the number on the log." 5 in, I said. 5 out," Maya finished. "But we're 4, Lila whispered. The woods answered that. They all whispered at once. Not 4, not 4, not 4. Every tree, every shape, every voice the forest had collected. Not 4. Before we could move, the figure behind the cabin took a step forward. Not a fast step. A slow, deeply intentional one. Its leg bent too far at the knee before straightening. The ground seemed to flex beneath its foot, as if the soil didn't quite know how to accept its weight. "Back!" I hissed, pulling Maya and Lila behind a fallen tree trunk. The figure froze, then tilted its head, not in confusion, in recognition, like a moment of understanding had passed between us. I don't know why, but I felt certain it knew which one of us it wanted, and it wasn't random. It had been waiting all along for me. We crouched behind the tree trunk, breath hissing through our teeth. "We can't stay here," Maya whispered. "They're moving in." She was right. The shapes behind us were drawing closer. Their feet were barely audible, soft, synchronized, like hands brushing lightly over leaves. The air thickened with cold, and with it, a sense of expectation. The forest was waiting for the moment when it could merge the false number with the real one. I peeked over the trunk. The figure behind the cabin had stepped closer, only 10 yards away now. Its face, God, its face, it had no eyes, just dark impressions, like fingerprints pressed deep into soft clay, and the smile, wide, stretched, impossibly still. Lila saw it too and covered her mouth to keep from screaming. "That thing," she choked, "that thing isn't wearing Jonah's shape." "No," I said. "It's wearing someone else." Who? I felt my heart twist. I don't know. Maybe someone who came here before us. Maybe someone the forest had counted. Maybe someone who never left. But as the figure took another slow step forward, I realized something else. It wasn't just wearing a shape. It was trying to adjust the shape. Its arms twitched, lengthening slightly. Its spine creaked as it straightened to match our height. Its shoulders rolled forward as if imitating our posture. Maya exhaled shakily. It's trying to look like us. No, I said. It's trying to look like me. The figure paused, then tilted its head again, exactly the way I had tilted mine 30 seconds earlier. Everything inside me went cold. It had been watching me longer than the others, watching how I moved, how I breathed, how I held my arms, how I ran, how I hesitated, how I turned. It wasn't just copying me, it was rehearsing me, practicing, preparing to take my place, to complete the group of 5. Maya tightened her grip on my arm. We run on 3. Downriver, we find another cabin or a road But I shook my head. No. They know every direction we'll go. They know every step before we take it. They'll get us on any trail. Then what do we do? Lila whispered, trembling violently. What do we do? I forced myself to breathe. Slowly. Deeply. The forest echoed my breath a half-second later, like a delayed reflection, and suddenly, an idea surfaced. Not a good one. Not a safe one, but the only one with even a fraction of a chance. We break the pattern. Maya stared at me. What? The forest thinks it knows what we'll do, so we do something it doesn't expect. Like what? Lila asked. I looked toward the river, toward the rapid, churning whitewater, toward the place no footprints had gone. We leave the trail, I whispered. We go through the water. They can't predict tracks in the river. Maya's eyes widened. We could drown. I know. And if the things are in the water, I know. The forest around us tensed. Branches stiffened. Leaves trembled. The shapes behind us paused, listening, understanding, panicking. Lila swallowed hard. If we stay on land, they'll catch us. They'll replace us, I corrected quietly. There was only one escape, one path the forest couldn't trace with dirt and prints and mirrored steps. One direction that didn't obey the rules of counting. The river. Maya nodded. Okay, she whispered. I reached for Lila's hand. She squeezed hard. Okay. We stepped out from behind the tree. The figure behind the cabin moved immediately, fast for the first time, its legs jerking like a marionette, its head snapping toward us with a crack of vertebrae. The shapes at the tree line began to surge forward, breaking their perfect synchronization. Fast now, urgent now, desperate now, because they knew. We had chosen a path that broke the count. The forest whispered its fury. Not 4, not 4, not 4. We ran, straight for the river. The water roared like a living thing. We hit the bank. Cold mists slapped our faces. Shapes lunged out of the trees, and we jumped into the freezing, rushing, impossible water. The current ripped us under. The world went white. The river swallowed us whole. Icy water slammed into my chest so hard it forced the air out of my lungs in a single violent burst. The current took me instantly. No chance to brace, no time to think. Just roaring white water and the sudden crushing weight of cold. My world spun. Up was down. Left was nowhere. My limbs thrashed, barely responding. Something hard, maybe a submerged rock, scraped my shin, ripping skin. The water yanked me deeper, tumbling me like a rag. A distant, muffled scream cut through the boiling rush. Maya? Lila? I reached out blindly, fingers clawing through frigid nothing. Another scream, closer this time. Then a gasp. I'm here! The current dragged her voice away. I kicked, fought, pushed toward what felt like the surface. My hand broke through air for half a second before the river sucked me under again. For a moment, one terrifying, disorienting moment, I felt something move beneath me. A shape. Long. Pale. Swimming against the current. A hand brushed my ankle. Not grabbing. Just testing. I jerked violently, kicking free as adrenaline burned through the cold. My head burst above the surface again, and I sucked in a desperate breath. The sky was a smear of gray. The riverbanks flashed past, a blur of rock and fallen logs. Maya! I screamed. Lila! I caught a glimpse. 2 heads bobbing in the chaos ahead. Keep going! Maya choked. Don't stop, swim! But the river didn't care what we wanted. It hurled us through a chute of whitewater, the noise deafening. Foam crashed into my face, choking me. The river twisted sharply, slamming me into a moss-covered boulder. Pain exploded across my ribs. I clung to the rock, coughing, spitting river water. Footsteps, no, splashes echoed along the banks. They were following in the shallows, shapes, dark and tall, running along the edges of the torrent, unbothered by roots, unaffected by rocks, learning how to move faster. One of them ran in perfect time with the river's rhythm, adjusting each stride as if memorizing how the water behaved. My heart seized. They were learning the river, too. Maya, I tried again. Upstream, where? I spotted her downstream, barely afloat, one arm around Lila, both kicking desperately as the river straightened into a long, narrow channel. I pushed off the boulder and let the current drag me toward them. The shapes on the banks grew more frantic. Some slipped and rose again instantly. Some plunged into the water, then recoiled as if the cold stung. Some leaned forward, arms dangling, feeling the air between us as we drifted past. One of them, tall, impossibly thin, waded in up to its knees and watched us pass with hollow indentations where eyes should have been. Its head turned slowly, tracking me, matching my breathing, my pulse, my movement. Its mouth stretched open slightly, mimicking the gasps I made when I surfaced. And then it whispered, just loud enough to rise over the river's roar. Not 4. I choked on river water. The thing took another step in, deeper, until the current caught its legs and nearly swept them out from under it. It steadied itself, leaning forward unnaturally, but then it stopped. The water was too unpredictable, too chaotic, too uncountable. The river broke its pattern, it broke the forest's rules, and I realized that was our only protection. We had to stay in the water, no matter the cost. Stay in the current, Maya shouted upstream. Don't grab anything, just go. A branch slammed into her shoulder, knocking her sideways. Lila shrieked. I swam harder, trying to close the distance. The river widened abruptly, slowing slightly. The water grew deeper, darker. My legs drifted down and brushed something slick and soft. I yanked them up. Another submerged shape glided beneath us. Smooth, pale, almost eel-like but wrong in every way a living creature could be. Its hand broke the surface for a moment. 5 fingers, human shape, but jointed twice. Then it sank again. Maya, I shouted. Left side. Bank, look. She saw it too. Her face crumpled. That's not human, she gasped. It's following the river, Lila sobbed. No, I said. My breath fogged in the cold air. It's following us. The river's path narrowed again, funneling us toward a cluster of fallen logs jammed across the water like a blockade. The current churned violently around them. Maya spotted it first. A sweeper. We'll get pinned, get pulled under. We have to angle right, I shouted, but angling right meant swimming toward the bank, toward the shapes shadowing us in the trees. The forest whispered in 100 distorted voices. 5, 5, 5, like it knew it was close, like it knew the count would fix itself soon. I'll clear it, I yelled. Get ready to push through after me. Maya's eyes widened. You can't, but I didn't let her finish. I took a breath and dove straight into the churn of water. The current punched me downward. Darkness swallowed me. I crashed into submerged branches, scraping my arms, tearing at my jacket. I forced myself upward, shoving a limb aside. The sweeper was a tangled mass of logs and branches wedged tight against both banks, a deadly trap. I grabbed one of the logs and heaved. It shifted an inch, not enough. Water hammered my chest, threatening to crush me. I pushed again, muscles screaming. The log rolled slightly, opening a narrow gap beneath the pile. Go, I gasped. Now, swim through, now! Maya and Lila kicked hard, ducking beneath the debris. The current pulled them through like thread through a needle's eye. I dove right after them. Branches scraped my back, my lungs burned, my fingers tangled in roots, and for a moment I got stuck, wedged between 2 logs, pinned by the current. Panic exploded. I shoved my shoulder through the gap, ripping fabric, tearing skin. Cold water flooded my mouth as my face sank under again. A pale shape brushed past me beneath the surface, its long hands trailing lightly over the logs. Searching. Feeling. It glided along the blockage, then turned and drifted deeper, circling. The forest had found a way to travel underwater. I kicked desperately and burst free on the other side. Maya grabbed me, dragging me upward. I coughed violently, chest heaving. The river carried us into calmer water. Quieter water. No rapids. Just a slow, cold glide between moss-covered stones. For the first time in hours, maybe since this nightmare began, we had space to breathe. Maya clung to a low-hanging branch, pulling Lila and me close. "Are you okay?" she gasped. I nodded shakily. "You?" "I don't know," she whispered. Leela sobbed softly against her shoulder. For a moment, the woods seemed far away. The shapes on the banks didn't follow us into this stretch. They stood at the edge of the rapids, tall silhouettes wavering like smoke, their heads tilted as if confused. The water had broken their rhythm, their prediction, their count. For the first time, we weren't following their path. "We need to get out," Lila whispered, hugging her body. "We're going to get hypothermia." "Not here," I said immediately. "They're waiting." "They won't stop," Maya whispered. "They don't get tired." "No," I said softly. "They don't get tired, they just get closer." We let the river carry us. Minutes passed. The cold bit into our skin. My fingers numbed, my jaw chattered uncontrollably. Just as Maya opened her mouth to speak, the river curved around a bend, and a shape rose from the water ahead of us. Not a silhouette, a person, a man, standing waist deep in the river. He wore soaked hiking clothes, his hair plastered to his skull, his arms hung limp at his sides. "Sir? Sir?" Maya called, voice cracking. "Sir, are you?" He raised his head, and I recognized him instantly. The man from the visitor log, Evan. The extra name. The fifth hiker who didn't exist. Except he did, or he had. Once. His eyes were wrong. Too wide, pupils blown and clouded like wet stone. His skin was waxy, his lips were blue. He opened his mouth, water poured out. Not a trickle. A stream. Like he was hollow, like he'd been filled. "Go back," he croaked. His voice slurred, stretched at unnatural angles, like words spoken through a body that no longer fit. Maya clung to me. We can't, please, we can't go back." "Go back," Evan repeated. "It wants 5. Lila screamed. Evan choked violently, his chest seizing. His spine bent backwards at a horrible angle as if something inside was rearranging him. His face shifted, not slowly. In a single horrifying jolt, his jaw snapped wider, his neck elongated, his cheeks sank, his skin tightened like wet paper drying, and he whispered with perfect clarity, "One more." Then he lunged, straight for us. Evan hit the water so hard it erupted around him in a white spray, arms thrashing, jaw unhinged in a stretched, unnatural scream. The sound tore across the river like metal dragged across teeth. "Go!" Maya screamed. "Swim! Swim!" We kicked backward, just as Evan's hands burst through the water's surface, clawing at the current with fingers that bent like wet branches. "He's behind us!" Lila shrieked. "No looking back!" I shouted. "Swim!" The river surged beneath us, but now the current wasn't helping us escape. It was dragging us straight toward a cluster of broken trees jammed against a bend in the river. Their dead branches jutted upward like the ribs of an enormous animal. "Left!" Maya gasped. "Left! Avoid the fallen trees." We angled hard, kicking with everything we had. My lungs burned. My arms felt like they were splitting from the cold. Behind us, Evan screeched. A wet, tearing sound followed. I didn't look, I wouldn't, but I heard it, a sound like limbs popping free of bone, like wet rope snapping, like something too old to move suddenly deciding to. "Come on!" Maya cried, voice raw. We broke past the fallen trees just as Evan slammed into them. His scream echoed up the riverbank, distorted by water, by broken lungs. It almost sounded human for a moment. Almost. Then the woods answered him. Not 4, not 4, not 4. Hundreds of voices layered into one. The forest was closing in. The river widened again, slowing to a swollen, murky basin. Dark water stretched ahead, barely moving. Fallen logs drifted lazily. The air stung with pine resin and the metallic smell of moss. The cold was savage now, deep, bone grinding. Lila's lips were turning purple. Maya's hands shook violently. "We can't stay in the water much longer," Maya whispered. "We'll black out." "We don't have a choice," I said. "Everything on land is..." But I stopped mid-sentence, because the river here didn't feel empty. It felt watched. The water bulged once, subtly. Then again, like something moved beneath us. Something large, something pacing our strokes. Maya saw it too. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's under us." Lila sobbed weakly. "We're going to die." "We are not dying here," I said, forcing the words through frozen lips. But then the water shifted, hard. A sudden swell rose beneath Maya, lifting her upward. Her scream tore out of her. "It's grabbing me. It's—" She was jerked sideways, dragged under. "Maya!" I lunged, plunging my arms beneath the dark surface. My hands found hers. I gripped tight. Something below us pulled in the opposite direction, its strength unreal, like a rope dragging her toward the bottom. Her fingers slipped through mine. "No! No!" I dove deeper, reaching, clawing blindly, but the cold blinded everything. My limbs numbed instantly. I kicked upward, lungs screaming, and burst to the surface again. "Maya!" Lila cried. "Where is she? Where is she?" Then Maya's head surfaced, her hair plastered to her skull, her face white with shock. Her eyes huge. "I'm here," she gasped. I swam toward her, then froze. Her voice, it wasn't right. Not her pitch, not her rhythm, not her breath. It was the forest learning her, practicing her, rehearsing her. Maya locked eyes with me and whispered, "It likes you." She smiled, a wide, wrong, stretching smile that split her lips at the corners. "No," I breathed. "No, this isn't—" Lila screamed, pure terror shredding her voice. "That's not her! Run, run, run!" The shape wearing Maya's face lunged at us, breaking the surface in a burst of froth and pale limbs. We fled, cutting across the water, swimming with nothing left but desperation. The cold knifed through my muscles, threatening to shut everything down. Behind us, something thrashed. Something surfaced. Something cried with Maya's voice. Something slipped beneath again. Then it stopped following, just like that. Lila gasped. "Why did it stop?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. It wasn't giving up. It was repositioning, learning where we would get out, learning which one of us it needed. The river narrowed again ahead, funneling between sharp stone cliffs. A fallen tree bridged the water, a massive ancient trunk coated in moss, a crossing point, a trap. "We have to go under," Lila gasped. "No," I said. "Too shallow. It'll pin us." "Over," she whispered. "We go over." "But they'll be waiting." "We have no choice." She was right. We swam toward the trunk. The water beneath it was black, unnaturally black. I avoided looking into it. The sun slipped behind a cloud as we reached the log. Shadows deepened instantly. We clung to the bark, trembling violently. "You first," I told Lila. She scrambled weakly onto the trunk, hugging it with shaking arms. As she swung a leg over, the water behind us rippled. Hard. Something surfaced. Not a face this time. Not a body. A hand. Just a hand. Reaching up through the water, fingers yawning open. Stretching. Listening. "Move!" I shouted. Lila scrambled across the trunk, slipping once but catching herself. I pushed up after her. The moment my weight settled on the trunk, I heard it. A hiss. Not from the forest, from the water, followed by a sound like a wet cloth peeling away from stone. The hand sank beneath the surface again, like it had confirmed something. I crawled across the log. Halfway across, a crunch echoed from the riverbank behind us. Not a twig, a bone. I turned my head. Shapes lined the bank. Dozens, maybe more. Tall, thin, silent. They didn't run, didn't lunge, didn't hide. They stood perfectly still, faces tilted upward, watching us cross, waiting, counting. One shape took a step forward. Its foot sank into the mud. It lifted its head, and its facial impressions shifted, molding, changing, adjusting to look exactly like me. My breath froze. "No," I whispered. "No." The copy took another step. Its legs bent incorrectly. Its spine arched wrong. Its shoulders popped like wood creaking. Then another shape adjusted too, and another. Until 5 copies stood at the front of the group. 5 of me. They were choosing which of them would take my place, replacing me, erasing me. Lila cried out behind me, "Get off the log, just go." I tore my eyes away and scrambled across the trunk. The moment my feet hit the far bank, the forest exhaled, long, low, satisfied. We stumbled into dark pines, dripping, shaking uncontrollably. The cold hit us full force now that we were out of the river. "We need shelter," I whispered. I can't feel my hands." "There," Lila pointed, "a cabin. Not the ranger shelter from before. A different one. Older. crooked, crumbling, but real. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney, fresh smoke. Someone was inside, or something was pretending to be. We staggered toward it. The door creaked open as we approached, not by wind, by invitation. The glow of a fire pulsed inside. Warmth, light, safety, not safety. A trap. Lila hesitated a few feet from the entrance, clutching her arms. Her skin was turning gray-blue from the cold. I can't stay out here, she whispered. Please. I couldn't blame her. The cold would kill us. The forest would kill us faster. I took a shaky breath. We check it, I said. We stay together. If something's inside, we run. She nodded. We stepped into the cabin. Spark. The warmth hit us instantly. Thick, heavy heat that pressed against our clothes, steaming the river water from our skin. The fire crackled in a stone hearth. Someone had lit it recently. Hello? I called softly. Is anyone? A voice answered from the corner. Low. Human. Weak. Close the door. Lila gasped. Someone's alive. A man sat slumped in a chair, wrapped in blankets, his face gaunt, his beard ragged, his eyes sunken but alert. You need to close the door, he rasped. I shut it quickly. He looked between us, studying our faces. How many are you? He asked. 2, I said. He swallowed hard. Not 3? No, I repeated firmly. 2. His eyes softened with recognition. They won't come in unless the count is wrong, he whispered. Lila trembled. What is happening? What are they? His eyes flicked to the window. Shadows moved outside. Many shadows. They're not one thing, he whispered. They're the forest, and the forest counts. My chest tightened. Did you write the log? I asked. His eyes filled with pain. Yes, he whispered. I wrote the 5th name. I didn't mean to. I thought I was with a group. I thought. He stopped. Then a long, soft exhale drifted against the cabin wall. Something leaned against the outside wood. Pressing, listening. They found you, the man whispered. The cabin grew very, very quiet. His voice shook as he whispered, You can't leave. It knows your number now. What number? I whispered. He looked at me. Then Lila, then the shadows outside. His voice broke. 5. Lila grabbed my hand violently, and outside. The forest whispered in 100 overlapping voices. 5. 5. 5. Then something pressed its hand against the window, long fingers, impossibly thin, palm flattening the glass. 5 of them. It was my hand, my shape, my stolen print, trying to come inside, trying to take my place, trying to finish the count. The hand on the window didn't tap or drag its fingers. It simply pressed, palm flat against the glass, as if testing the thin line that separated inside from out. It was my hand. Exactly my hand. Right down to the small scar I had on my thumb from cutting myself years ago while cooking. The fingers were too long, too perfect, the joints subtly wrong, like they were built to bend farther than any human bones should. Lila whimpered, retreating behind me. The old man shook his head slowly. Once it chooses a shape, it doesn't stop. It keeps refining. It keeps rehearsing. Behind the glass, the copy tilted its head, a perfect echo of my own terrified motion seconds earlier. Outside, more silhouettes gathered, at least a dozen. Some tall, some crooked, some so thin they looked like shadows peeled off the trees. All of them leaned toward the cabin, waiting, watching, mouths slack, faces incomplete, bodies twitching like marionettes trying to learn how to move. 5, they whispered. 5. 5. Each voice felt close enough to brush my skin. The old man pulled his blanket closer. They won't come in as long as the number is right. But it's not right, Lila whispered. There are only 2 of us. His gaze flicked toward me. No, the forest knows there are 5. My throat tightened painfully. 5 who? 1 missing, he said weakly. 1 replaced, 1 you lost, 1 you needs. Lila gasped. It wants him. The old man nodded. It always wants the one who notices it first. A chill cut through me, the visitor log, the extra footprints, the pacing above the trail, the whispers that matched my breath. It wasn't random. It had chosen me the moment I saw the wrong name. Outside, something scraped across the window pane slowly, like a fingertip trying to trace a letter. Not 4, the forest murmured. I backed away from the window, pulse hammering. We can't stay here, I said. It's going to wait us out. The old man coughed, his breath rattling. I've been here 6 days. They've waited out more than 1 group before. 6 days. My stomach lurched. Where are the others? Lila asked in a whisper. He stared down at his hands, silence stretched. They're still here, he finally said, just not in the ways they remember. A cold, crawling dread slid through my spine. Lila's eyes filled with tears. There has to be a way out. There is, the man said, but you won't like it. I swallowed hard. What is it? He pointed toward the far wall, toward a narrow crawlspace door set into the floor. Old hinges. A rope loop for a handle, barely noticeable. That leads to the root tunnels, he said. Old mining shafts too shallow to be mapped. They run under the river, under the ridges, but they don't run straight. People get lost. Do the forest things go down there? Lila asked. They can, he whispered, but they can't count paths that don't stay the same. Unpredictable, I said. Exactly. He leaned closer, and if you make it far enough, the tunnels lead to the back range road. Lila's breath hitched. A road. A road means we can get help. But the man didn't smile, his eyes filled with a heavy sadness. I didn't tell you the rest, he rasped. Then he pointed at me. It only lets 4 of you leave. Lila's face twisted. There aren't 4 of us. There are, he whispered. In its count. My throat closed. Me, Lila whispered. You, the old man. And she stopped, because the forest was whispering outside, louder now. 4, 4, 4. It's saying 4 now. She breathed. The man nodded slowly. Because you're inside. Inside the cabin, the count resets. They cannot enter unless the interior count and the exterior count disagree. I felt sick. So if we leave together, I said, voice barely audible, it'll try to fix it. Yes, he whispered. How? Lila demanded. What happens if we leave as 3? He didn't answer with words. He just gestured toward the window. The silhouettes pressed closer to the cabin like bodies leaning hungrily against the walls, waiting for us to break the count. Lila grabbed my wrist. No, please, no, you're not. Don't even think. But I understood what the man was saying. One of us wasn't supposed to leave the cabin, not because they wanted us dead, because they wanted us corrected. The forest only let out the number it brought in, 5, and it had chosen me. I stepped back from Lila. No, she sobbed. No, don't leave me. I'm not, I said. I'm staying. She stared at me, horrified. That's what it wants, she whispered. That's what it's been doing. Since the beginning, it's been isolating you, cutting you out. Why? Because if I go with you, I said softly, it will replace me, or kill one of you to keep the number right. She collapsed against me, crying into my chest. They'll take you, she whispered. I know. The old man swallowed weakly. The forest doesn't just take, sometimes it keeps. Lila trembled violently. I held her tighter. You're getting out, I said. Both of you. The man nodded. It will let us leave. And me? I asked quietly. He met my eyes. You'll become part of the woods. Outside the forest whispered, soft, eager, certain. 5, 5, 5. Lila sobbed. I can't leave you. You have to, for the count to balance. She shook her head violently, clinging to me. Then we heard it. A heavy, deliberate step on the cabin roof. Then another. Then a long slide of something dragging across the boards. The forest was losing patience. They know, the old man said. They know their 5th is ready. I gently pulled Lila away. Her eyes pleaded with me. Please, don't do this. Please. But survival is cruel. And the forest was crueler. Go, I whispered. The old man tugged open the trapdoor. Cold earth smell drifted up from the black tunnel below. He climbed down the ladder shakily. Lila sobbed harder. You'll die. Maybe, I said. Outside, the shapes pressed closer. The cabin walls groaned. But not today. I pushed her toward the opening. Go, and don't look back. She hesitated, shaking violently. Then, sobbing, she went down into the dark. The man pulled the trapdoor shut from below. Their footsteps faded into the tunnels. The cabin grew silent. Utterly silent. Then, a hand slipped beneath the doorframe. My hand. Almost. The door creaked open, and a voice, my voice, spoke from the darkness outside. Soft, assured. Finished. 5. The forest stepped inside, and I no longer knew which one of us moved first.